Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Ezra Millfield, and I've been walking these mountains for 43 years. 17 of those as a park ranger, but I knew every ridge and hollow long before I put on the uniform. My daddy walked these same trails before the mining accident took him, and his daddy before that. We're mountain people, and these hills are in our blood. October of 1961 was turning cold early. The leaves had already dropped, making the forest floor soft and quiet under your boots. I was checking the backcountry around Cataract Falls when the call came in on my radio, crackly and faint like they always were up in those hollows. Ezra, we got missing campers. Johnson family from Knoxville. I clicked the radio twice to show I heard. Missing folks weren't uncommon, especially with hunting season starting. City people got turned around easy in these woods. Usually found them a day later, embarrassed and hungry, but fine. But this felt different somehow. The Johnson family had permits for 3 days near the falls. Father, pregnant mother, and their 10-year-old boy. Simple camping trip, nothing fancy. They should have checked out yesterday morning. I hiked the 8 miles to their campsite, my boots finding the familiar rhythm of the mountain trail. The radio went dead about halfway there. Happens a lot in the deep hollows where the peaks block everything. Made you feel alone in a way that city folks couldn't understand. When I found their camp, my skin went cold. The tent was still up, but slashed open from the outside. Long, deep cuts that looked like claw marks, but bigger than any bear I'd ever seen. Their Coleman lanterns sat on the picnic table, still burning from the night before. Half-eaten beans sat in a pot over cold ashes. But here's what made my hands shake. All their metal things were arranged in perfect patterns around the campsite. Belt buckles, zippers, the father, his watch, their cooking pots, laid out in straight lines and circles like someone had been playing with them. That wasn't natural. Animals don't arrange things. People don't arrange strangers' belongings and then disappear. I radioed for backup, though I wasn't sure the call would get through. While I waited, I walked the edges of their camp looking for tracks. Found them too. Bare human footprints, but 16 inches long and pressed deep into the soft earth. Deeper than any man should make, like whatever left them weighed twice what it should. The tracks led toward the old hemlock grove, the dark part of the hollow where the trees grew so thick you couldn't see sky. Local Cherokee used to say that grove was sacred, that spirits lived there. My Cherokee friend Tommy Crowwing told me stories when we were kids. Said his grandmother warned him never to camp in that particular hollow. Something lives in the deep woods, Ezra, he'd said. Something that remembers when this land was different. I'd always figured those were just stories. Mountain folks loved their ghost tales, especially when they wanted to keep outsiders away from their moonshine stills. But standing there in that slashed campsite with those impossible footprints leading into the dark trees, those old stories didn't seem so silly anymore. The temperature dropped while I waited for backup. Not the gradual cooling you expect in October, but a sudden chill that made my breath fog. The forest went quiet too. No insects, no squirrels chattering, no bird calls. Just silence so complete it made your ears ring. That's when I noticed my compass was spinning. The needle swung in slow circles, never settling on true north. My flashlight dimmed, even though I'd put in fresh batteries that morning. Something was wrong in that hollow. Something that didn't belong in any world I understood. When Billy Cornett's show. Wet up an hour later, huffing and red-faced from the climb, I was grateful for the company. Billy was young, 24, and eager to prove himself. Good kid, strong climber, but he'd only been ranging for 6 months. This was his first missing persons case. "What do you think happened, Ezra?" he asked, looking at the destroyed campsite. I studied those massive footprints again, following them with my eyes toward the dark grove. "I don't rightly know, Billy, but we need to find that family. Could be bears," he suggested. Big ones. Bears don't arrange cookware in patterns, I told him. And they don't leave tracks like that. Billy crouched down beside one of the prints. His face went pale. Jesus, Ezra. What's got feet that big? I checked my watch. 3 o'clock, but the light in the hollow felt like evening. The shadows were too long, too dark. Everything felt wrong. I don't know, I said. But we're going to find out. We followed the tracks into the hemlock grove, our flashlights cutting weak beams through the gathering darkness. The prints led straight toward the heart of the hollow, where the old-growth trees crowded together like they were keeping secrets. You ever been back here before? Billy whispered. Something about the place made you want to whisper. Few times, I said, checking for stills mostly, but it always felt unfriendly. That was the only word for it. The grove felt like it was watching us, waiting for us to leave or come close enough to grab. The air was thick and still, no wind moving through the branches. Our footsteps on the wet leaves sounded too loud. After a quarter mile, we found the first piece of evidence. A woman's blue dress, torn and dirty, hanging from a branch about 12 feet up. Too high for her to have put it there herself, too high for any normal person to reach. How'd that get up there? Billy asked, pointing his light at it. I was wondering the same thing. The branch wasn't broken or bent. The dress just hung there like someone had placed it carefully, like a flag marking territory. Help me get it. Down, I said. Billy boosted me up and I grabbed the dress. It was still damp, smelled like fear sweat and something else, something wild and musky that made my nose wrinkle. Mrs. Johnson had been wearing this when they disappeared. The tracks kept going deeper into the grove toward the sound of falling water. Cataract Falls was back there somewhere, hidden behind the thick trees. But as we walked, I started noticing other sounds. A low humming, so deep you felt it in your bones more than heard it. And voices, distant voices that might have been the wind, or might have been people calling. You hear that? Billy asked. Yeah. Keep moving. My watch said 4 o'clock, but the hollow was getting darker. The humming was getting louder too, coming from somewhere ahead of us. The flashlight beam seemed weaker, like the darkness was eating the light. That's when we found the cave. It was hidden behind the waterfall, just a black mouth in the rock that you'd never see unless you knew where to look. The massive footprints led right to it, pressed deep in the mud at the entrance. But there were other tracks too, smaller ones, human-sized. The Johnson family had been here. Should we call for backup? Billy asked. His voice was shaky now. Radio won't work down here, I reminded him. Besides, if they're in there, they need help now. The cave mouth was wide enough for 2 people, tall enough to walk upright. Our lights showed scratches on the rock walls, deep gouges that ran 8 feet up the sides, too high for bears, too regular for natural erosion. And there were paintings, old ones, faded but still visible. Cherokee symbols and figures that Tommy had shown me in books. But these weren't the usual hunting scenes or spiritual guides. These showed something else. A tall, dark figure standing over smaller human shapes. Warning signs. We shouldn't be here, Billy whispered. But I could hear something from deeper in the cave. Voices. Weak and far away, but definitely human. Someone's alive in there, I said. We have to check. The cave angled down and back, following the course of an underground stream. Our footsteps echoed in ways that made the space sound huge, like we were walking through a cathedral. The humming was louder now, vibrating through the rock. 50 yards in, Billy grabbed my arm. Look, he breathed. In the weak beam of his flashlight, we could see them. The Johnson family huddled together against the far wall of a wider chamber. They were alive, but something was terribly wrong. They looked older. The father's hair was white instead of brown. The mother's face was lined and hollow. Even the 10-year-old boy looked like he'd aged 20 years in 2 days. Mr. Johnson, I called softly. They turned toward us, moving slow like old people. Their eyes were wide and unfocused, like they were seeing through us to something else. Don't look at it, the father whispered. Don't let it see you looking. What? I asked. Don't look at what? But he just shook his head and pointed up. That's when I made the mistake of following his finger with my flashlight beam. High up on the cave wall, maybe 20 feet above us, something moved. Something large and dark that seemed to absorb the light instead of reflecting it. At first I thought it was just a shadow, a trick of the beam. But shadows don't breathe. It was roughly human-shaped but wrong in every proportion. 9 feet tall, arms too long, fingers that ended in claws. Its face was the worst part, almost human but stretched, with eyes that reflected no light at all. Just black holes in a face too pale and too thin, and it was looking right at us. Billy made a choking sound beside me. His flashlight beam wavered and went out completely. The thing on the wall tilted its head, studying us like we were interesting insects. When it moved, it flowed like liquid shadow, defying everything I knew about how bodies worked. Then it smiled. I've seen a lot of thin aches in these mountains, but I never want to see anything smile like that again. Too many teeth, too wide, like its mouth could unhinge and swallow us whole. Run, I whispered to Billy. Run now. But he was frozen, staring up at the creature. His mouth was moving, but no sound came out. The thing dropped from the wall without making a sound, landing in a crouch between us and the cave entrance. Up close, it was even worse. Its skin looked like old leather, gray and mottled. It smelled like wet earth and decay. And it spoke, not with its mouth, but directly into our heads. A voice like grinding stone and winter wind. More guests. How long since I had proper guests? The creature stood between us and the only way out, its head almost touching the cave ceiling. This close, I could see details I wished I couldn't. The way its ribs showed through paper-thin skin, how its fingers ended in black claws longer than my hand. You taste of old mountains, it said inside my mind. Of blood that knows this place. Good. The others were flavorless. Billy finally found his voice, but it came out as a scream that echoed through the cave like breaking glass. The sound seemed to amuse the creature. It tilted its head the other way, studying him with those empty black eyes. What do you want? I managed to ask, my hand moving slowly toward the emergency flare on my belt. What I have always wanted. What was promised to me when the treaties were broken, when the sacred places were given to strangers. Sustenance, memory, the essence of those who do not belong. It moved closer, flowing more than walking. Behind it, the Johnson family huddled together, aged and broken. The mother was crying silently, tears running down her wrinkled cheeks. They have been adequate, but temporary. I require more permanent residence. I pulled the flare, yanked the cap, and struck it in one motion. Red light blazed through the cave, throwing wild shadows on the walls. The creature shrieked, not in our heads this time, but with its actual voice, a sound like tearing metal. It stumbled backward, raising those long arms to shield its face. For a moment, I thought we had a chance. Move, I shouted to Billy. Get the family. But Billy wasn't moving. He stood frozen, staring at something behind me. His face had gone completely white. I turned and saw them. Shadows moving along the cave walls, but shadows with substance. Dozens of them, human-shaped but wrong, like the silhouettes of people who had been stretched and twisted. My children, the creature said, lowering its arms despite the flare light. The essence of all who have fed me over the centuries. They are eager to welcome you. The shadow people flowed toward us like smoke given form. Where they touched the cave walls, the rock seemed to darken and crack. One of them brushed against Billy's shoulder, and he screamed again. But this time the sound was hollow, like something was being pulled out of him. I grabbed Billy's arm and dragged him toward the cave entrance. The flare held high. The shadows hissed and pulled back from the light, but they didn't disappear. They followed us, staying just outside the red glow. Behind us, the creature laughed. Run, little rangers. Run back to your radios and your reports. Tell them about the accident. Tell them about the climbing fall that claimed your partner. Tell them whatever lies will let you sleep. We stumbled through the narrow passage, Billy leaning heavily on me. Something was wrong with him. He kept looking back at shadows that weren't there, mumbling about his grandfather. "Grandpa Joe?" he whispered. "Is that you, Grandpa Joe?" "There's nobody there, Billy. Keep moving." But I could see them too now. Faces in the darkness, people I'd known who had died over the years. My wife Sarah, who'd passed giving birth to Martha. My father, crushed in the mine collapse. They were all there, reaching out to us with hands made of shadow. He broke out of the cave into the gray light of the hollow. It should have been sunset, but my watch said it was only 5 o'clock. Time was wrong here, bent somehow by whatever lived in that cave. Billy collapsed against a tree, gasping. In the dim light, I could see that his hair had gone gray at the temples. His hands were shaking like an old man's. "What was that thing?" he whispered. Before I could answer, we heard it. The low humming again, but louder now, coming from everywhere at once. The trees around us began to sway without any wind. Leaves fell like rain, even though most had already dropped days ago. And then we saw it standing at the cave mouth. In the open air, the creature looked even more impossible. 9 feet tall, but somehow it cast a shadow 50 feet long that stretched up the cliff face behind it. The shadow moved independently, reaching toward us with arms that ended in claws the size of dinner plates. "You cannot leave," it said. No one leaves. The hollow remembers every trespass, every broken promise. You will feed me or you will serve me. Choose. Billy tried to run. I don't blame him. He was young, and what we were seeing broke every rule of the world he knew. But the shadows caught him before he made it 10 steps. They didn't grab him physically. Instead, they seemed to flow into him through his eyes and mouth. Billy's scream cut off mid-note, and he stood perfectly still, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. When he turned to look at me, his eyes were completely black. "Ezra," he said in a voice that wasn't quite his own. "It's not so bad. It doesn't hurt after the first moment. And you get to see everyone again. Everyone you've lost." The thing that had been Billy took a step toward me, and I saw my wife's face in the shadows behind it. Sarah, looking exactly as she had the day she died, reaching out to me with love in her eyes. "Join us, Ezra," she said. "Join us, and we can be together again." I wanted to. God help me, I wanted to walk into those shadows and hold my wife again, even if it meant becoming something like them. But then I thought of Martha, my 16-year-old daughter, waiting at home for her father to come back from work. She'd already lost her mother. She couldn't lose me too. I lit my second flare. The creature roared and Billy things stumbled backward, but this time I was ready for them. While they were blinded by the light, I ran, not toward the trail. That would take too long and they'd catch me in the open. Instead, I headed for the steepest part of the cliff, where rock climbing skills might give me an advantage over something that flowed like smoke. Behind me, I could hear them coming. Not footsteps, but a sound like wind through dead leaves, like whispers in a language I didn't want to understand. I climbed faster than I ever had in my life, my fingers finding holds in the dark rock by instinct and desperation. 20 feet up, 30, 40. High enough that a fall would kill me, but maybe high enough to get above whatever power held this hollow in its grip. When I looked down, the creature was standing directly below me, its shadow face turned up toward mine. Billy was beside it, still wearing that unnatural smile. "Climb higher, little ranger. Climb to the very top. It will only make the fall more satisfying." But I kept climbing, because stopping meant giving up. And I couldn't give up, not with Martha waiting for me. At 60 feet, something changed. The oppressive weight of the hollow lifted slightly, like I was climbing out of deep water toward the surface. My radio crackled to life. "Ezra, respond. Search team." I grabbed the radio with shaking hands. "This is Millfield. I'm at Cataract Falls. Officer down. Need immediate backup and medical." The response was scratchy but audible. Copy, Ezra. Team's en route. What's your situation? I looked down at the creature and the thing that had been Billy. They were still there, but something about the radio contact seemed to diminish them slightly. Climbing accident, I said, the lie burning my throat. Billy fell in the cave system. Possible fatalities among the missing campers. Because what else could I say? That an ancient shadow creature was feeding on human souls in a cave behind Cataract Falls? That my partner had been possessed by something that defied every law of nature? They'd lock me up, and Martha would be alone. So I climbed higher and lied into the radio and tried not to look at Sarah's face in the shadows below. I spent 3 hours on that cliff face, holding on to rock and lies with equal desperation. The rescue team's voices on the radio kept me anchored to the real world, but every time I looked down, the creature was still there, waiting. When the search team finally reached the hollow with ropes and medical equipment, the thing below me faded back into the cave like smoke. But I could still feel it watching, still hear its voice in the back of my mind. This is not finished, keeper of the old blood. You will return to me, or I will come to you. They found Billy's body at the bottom of the cliff, broken like he'd fallen from a great height. The official report said he'd slipped while investigating the cave system. There was no mention of aged flesh or shadow-touched eyes, because by the time they reached him, he looked normal again. Dead, but normal. The Johnson family was harder to explain. When the medics brought them out of the cave, they looked like regular people again. The father's hair brown, the mother young and pregnant, the boy just 10 years old. But they were all in deep shock, couldn't remember what had happened to them. Must have been the cold, the chief ranger said. Hypothermia can cause all kinds of confusion. I nodded and wrote my report. Climbing accident, exposure. Standard procedure followed. All lies, boo. Lies that kept the truth buried where it belonged. But that night, alone in my cabin, I couldn't sleep. Every shadow looked wrong. Every sound outside might have been something approaching. I kept checking on Martha, making sure she was safe in her bed. Around midnight, I made a decision that probably saved both our lives. I drove to Tommy Crowwing's house on the reservation, 20 miles from the park. Tommy was older now, gray-haired and weathered, but he still remembered the stories his grandmother told. You look like you've seen a ghost, Ezra, he said when I knocked on his door. Worse than a ghost. I need to know about the old stories, Tommy. The ones about things that live in the deep hollows. His face went serious. Which hollow? Cataract Falls, the Hemlock Grove. Tommy was quiet for a long moment. Then he invited me in and put coffee on. My grandmother called it Kituwa Asgaya, he said. The shadow that walks between worlds. She said it was old when the Cherokee first came to these mountains, old and hungry and angry. What does it want? What it's always wanted, to feed on the life force of those who don't belong here. But it got stronger after the treaties were broken, after our people were forced from their sacred places. Grief and betrayal fed it, made it more than it was. Tommy pulled out an old leather pouch, filled with what looked like dried tobacco leaves. Grandmother left this to me with instructions. Said if the shadow ever stirred again, someone would need to make the old bargain. What bargain? Respect for respect, honor for honor. The shadow leaves your people alone, and you leave its hollow alone. Simple as that. He handed me the pouch. But it has to be someone with old blood, someone the mountains recognize. And it has to be done right, or it'll kill you. I took the pouch, feeling the weight of centuries in those dried leaves. How do I do it right? Tommy taught me the words, the gestures, the proper way to approach a sacred place. It took hours, and by the time he was finished, the sun was coming. UP. You don't have to do this, he said. You could transfer to another park, take Martha somewhere safe. It said it would come for me, and there are other people who might wander into that hollow. Tommy nodded. My grandmother always said the old agreements were binding on both sides. If you honor your part, it has to honor its. I drove back to the park as the morning shift was starting. Told my supervisor I needed to check the Cataract Falls area one more time, make sure it was safe for future visitors. He agreed, probably thinking I was dealing with survivor's guilt over Billy's death. The hike to the hollow felt different in daylight. Still wrong, still watched, but not immediately threatening. When I reached the cave entrance, I could see fresh scratch marks on the stone, deeper than before, more deliberate. I followed Tommy's instructions exactly. Placed the tobacco offering on a flat stone near the cave mouth, spoke the Cherokee words of respect and acknowledgement, asked for the old bargain to be renewed. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the shadow flowed out of the cave. In daylight, it looked less substantial, but somehow more real. I could see through it to the rock behind, but I could also see the intelligence in those black eyes, the weight of centuries of anger and hunger. "You speak the old words," it said. "But you are not Cherokee." "No," I agreed. "But I'm mountain-born, and these hills know my blood. I'm asking for the old agreement. Respect for respect." "And what will you give me, Keeper? What will you sacrifice to seal this bargain?" I thought of Billy, of the Johnson family, of all the people who might wander into this hollow in years to come. "I'll make sure no one disturbs your rest," I said. "I'll keep them away from this place, and I'll come back every season to renew the offering as long as I'm able." The creature studied me for a long time. Then it smiled, not the terrible predator's grin from before, but something almost sad. "Your blood remembers the old ways, even if your mind has forgotten. Very well. The bargain is made. This hollow remains mine, and your people remain yours. But remember, Keeper, if the agreement is broken, if even one trespasser disturbs my rest—" "I understand." "See that you do." The shadow flowed back into the cave, and suddenly the hollow felt normal again. Birds sang in the trees. A squirrel chattered somewhere overhead. The oppressive weight that had hung over the place was gone. But I could still feel its presence, waiting and watching from the darkness behind the waterfall. That was 23 years ago. I'm 66 now, retired from the Park Service, but still living in the same cabin where Martha grew up. She's married, living in Knoxville with kids of her own, but she still calls every week. I never told her about what really happened at Cataract Falls. Some knowledge is too dangerous to share, but I kept my part of the bargain. Every season, I hike the 8 miles to that hollow and leave an offering of Cherokee tobacco near the cave mouth. Sometimes I see signs that others have been there, hikers who ignored the warning signs, campers who thought they knew better than posted regulations. But they always leave again, quickly and quietly, with confused stories about getting turned around or feeling suddenly ill. The shadow keeps its part of the agreement. The area was officially closed to camping after Billy's accident. Geological instability, the report said. Dangerous rock formations. The trail is still open to day hikers, but few people make the full journey anymore. Something about the place discourages casual visitors. I've trained my replacement young ranger named Sarah Cobb. She's good people, takes the job seriously. I told her the hollow was sacred to the Cherokee, that it deserved respect and distance. She listens, which is all I can ask for. But I haven't told her about the real reason those warning signs need. To stay up. Some things you have to learn to carry alone. Last month, Martha brought her 8-year-old son to visit. Little Jimmy, curious about everything like kids should be. He wanted to see where Grandpa worked all those years, wanted to hear stories about the mountains. I told him some stories, safe ones about bears and wild turkeys and the time I helped rescue a hiker who'd broken his leg on the trail. But when he asked about the places that were off limits, the areas marked with warning signs, I got serious. Some places in these mountains weren't meant for visitors, Jimmy, I told him. They're older than we are, and they remember things we've forgotten. The signs aren't suggestions, they're promises. Promises that keep everyone safe. He nodded solemnly the way kids do when they sense something important is being said. Will you always keep the promises, Grandpa? As long as I'm able, I said. And after that, someone else will. That's how it works in the mountains. One keeper passes the duty to the next. I'm getting old now, and the hike to Cataract Falls gets harder every season. My knees ache, my back protests the weight of the pack, but I keep going because the alternative is unthinkable. Sometimes on the quarterly visits, I think I see Billy in the shadows near the cave mouth. Not the thing that wore his face that terrible day, but the real Billy, young and eager and grateful that someone still remembers his sacrifice. He waves sometimes, and I wave back. Sarah is always there too, my wife who died so young. She doesn't speak, but her presence is comforting. She understands why I have to keep coming back, why some promises can never be broken. The shadow and I have an understanding now. It feeds on small things. The life force of insects, the dreams of sleeping animals, the slow decay of fallen leaves. Enough to sustain it without harming anything that matters. In return, it keeps its hunger contained to that one hollow, and it discourages trespassers with quiet fear instead of violence. It's not friendship exactly, more like a truce between old enemies who've found a way to coexist. But I know it's still there, still watching, still remembering every broken treaty and every trespass. If the agreement ever fails, if someone else takes over who doesn't understand the importance of the old bargains, it will wake up hungry. That's why I'm writing this down now while my memory is still clear. So whoever comes after me will know the truth, will understand what those warning signs really mean. The mountains are beautiful, but they're not empty. They remember everything, every footstep, every campfire, every promise made or broken. And some of the things that remember are older and stranger than anything in our modern world. Respect the warnings, honor the agreements, keep the promises, and never ever camp in the hollow below Cataract Falls. Some places in these mountains weren't meant for outsiders, and they remember every trespass. My name is Jerry Coldwater, and I've been a ranger in these West Virginia mountains for 14 years now. Before that, I spent my days underground, mining coal like my daddy and his daddy before him. That changed back in '61 when the Black Rock mine collapsed. 12 good men went down that day, including my best friend Tommy. I was supposed to be on that shift, but my boy had gotten sick and I stayed home with him instead. Sometimes I think about that. How one sick kid saved my life while 12 others died. It made me think different about being underground. That's when I decided to become a park ranger. Same mountains, same coal dust in the air. But now I work to keep people safe instead of digging deeper into danger. People around here say I'm crazy for giving up good mining money to chase hikers and count trees. But after you've seen what I've seen, heard what I've heard down in those tunnels, you start to value the sunlight more. The old-timers used to tell stories about mine ghosts, spirits of dead miners still working their shifts. I always figured it was just bad air playing tricks on tired minds. Carbon monoxide can make you see all sorts of things that aren't there. My wife Sarah teaches at the local school. She's got more sense than me, which is why she married a ranger instead of another miner. Our two boys, Jake and Michael, are 8 and 10. They think their dad's job is pretty cool. Rescuing people, fighting forest fires, all that heroic stuff. I don't tell them about the other parts. The parts where you find hikers who didn't make it. The parts where you have to go places nobody should go. It's December now, 1975, and we've got 3 feet of snow on the ground with more coming. The mountains are beautiful when they're covered in white, but they're deadly too. One wrong step, one missed trail marker, and you're just another story people tell around. D the fire. The call came in on a Thursday morning. 3 days earlier, 4 college kids from West Virginia University had driven up to study rock formations in the old mining area near Seneca Rocks. Graduate students, their professor said. Smart kids working on their geology degrees. They were supposed to radio in every 12 hours, but nobody had heard from them since Monday night. Their last message mentioned strange sounds, the professor told me over the crackling radio. And they said something about warm air coming from the sealed mine entrances. I thought it was just geological venting, but now I knew the area he was talking about. The old Black Rock mine, where my friends died 14 years ago. They'd sealed it up good after the collapse, but there were dozens of other shafts and tunnels throughout those mountains. Most of them hadn't been touched since the 1890s, when the big mining companies pulled out after that terrible disaster. 47 men died in that one, buried so deep they never got the bodies out. The drive up took me 2 hours through winding mountain roads covered in ice. My partner for this search was Dale Wickham, a state trooper who'd grown up in these parts. Dale was good people, steady, reliable, not the type to panic when things got strange. He'd wait at the surface and keep the radio working while I went down to look for those kids. We found their equipment first: ropes, pulleys, and geological hammers laid out neat as you please at the entrance to the old mine. Their van was nowhere to be seen, but there were fresh tire tracks in the snow leading right up to the mine opening. That didn't make sense. If they'd driven away, why leave all their gear behind? Maybe someone picked them up, Dale suggested, but he didn't sound convinced. I knelt down and looked at the mine entrance. The old wooden boards that sealed it were broken, inward, like something had pushed through from the inside. Fresh wood splinters lay scattered on the snow, and when I put my hand near the opening, I felt it. Warm air flowing out of a mine. That should have been cold as a tomb. "Jerry," Dale called from behind me. "You better look at this." He was standing over their equipment, holding up a climbing rope. The end was cut clean, not frayed like it would be if it broke under stress. Someone had taken a knife to it. I checked my gear one more time. Helmet with a good light, backup flashlight, radio, rope, and my mining experience from the old days. After what happened to my friends in '61, I'd studied mine safety like my life depended on it. Because it did. "I'm going down," I told Dale. "If you don't hear from me in 2 hours, call for backup." "You sure about this?" he asked. "Maybe we should wait for more people." I looked at that broken wooden barrier again, felt that warm air on my face. 4 kids were missing, and every hour we waited made it less likely we'd find them alive. "Those college kids have been down there for 3 days, I said. "We can't wait any longer." As I squeezed through the broken boards into the darkness beyond, I heard Dale's voice behind me. "Be careful, Jerry. Something doesn't feel right about this place." He was right. Something didn't feel right at all. The first thing that hit me was the warmth. Mines are supposed to be cold this time of year, especially abandoned ones that haven't had heat or ventilation for over a decade. But the air flowing past my face felt like a spring morning, carrying scents that shouldn't exist. Fresh timber, coal dust, and something else. Something that smelled like sweat and tobacco. My helmet light cut through the darkness as I made my way down the main shaft. The wooden support beams looked older than dirt, but they seemed solid enough. Every 20 feet or so, I'd stop and call out, "Hello? Anyone down here? This is Park Ranger Coldwater." Nothing but echoes answered back. The tunnel split about 200 feet in. I'd studied the old mine meant apes before coming down, so I knew the layout. Left led to the main coal seam, where the 1975 students should be working. Right led deeper into the mountain, toward the sections that were sealed after the 1890s disaster. I went left first. That's when I heard it. The sound of metal on stone, rhythmic and steady. Tap, 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 like someone working with a pickaxe. "Hello?" I called again, moving toward the sound. "I'm here to help." The tapping stopped. I moved faster now, following the tunnel as it curved downward. My radio crackled. "Jerry, you copy? Everything okay down there?" "Fine so far, Dale. Hearing some sounds, might have found them." But as I rounded the bend, my light showed me an empty chamber. No students, no equipment, no sign anyone had been there recently. Yet the air still felt warm, and I could swear I smelled fresh coffee brewing somewhere. I checked my equipment. The methane detector was going crazy, needle jumping all over the place even though the air smelled clean. My compass spun like a carnival ride, and my backup flashlight kept flickering on and off by itself like it was sending some kind of signal. That's when I saw the lunch pails. 3 metal lunch boxes sat on a wooden crate in the corner of the chamber. Old-style pails, the kind miners carried in the early 1900s. They looked like they'd been placed there minutes ago. No dust, no rust, still warm to the touch. I opened one with my gloved hand. Inside was a still warm sandwich, an apple that looked freshly picked, and a thermos full of hot coffee. Steam rose from the cup when I unscrewed the lid, but that was impossible. This mine had been abandoned since 1961, sealed since then. No one could have been down here making coffee. I grabbed my radio. "Dale, I'm finding some strange things down here, might need backup. Static answered me. Then, faintly, I heard Dale's voice. Jerry? Jerry, say, can you hear me? Something's happening up here. The student's van just appeared in the parking lot. Engine's still warm, but nobody's in it. The radio went dead. I tried again, but got nothing but white noise. I was on my own now, 300 feet underground, with warm coffee and impossible lunch pails. I made a decision that probably saved my life. I took one of the coffee cups with me as evidence and headed back toward the main tunnel. That's when I heard the singing. Men's voices, deep and tired, singing an old mining song I remembered from my childhood. Down in the dark, where the coal dust flies, working hard 'neath the mountain's weight, digging deep where the black gold lies, praying we'll see the light of day. The voices were coming from the right tunnel, the sealed section that led toward the 1890s disaster site. Every instinct I had told me to get out of there, to run back to the surface and wait for backup. But those 4 college kids were still missing, and if they'd gone down that tunnel, I followed the singing. The right tunnel was different. The wooden support beams looked newer, stronger. The walls were lined with fresh timber, and electric lights had been strung along the ceiling. Lights that glowed with a warm, yellow radiance, even though there shouldn't be any power down here. The singing got louder as I went deeper. I could make out individual voices now, maybe a dozen men. They were singing work songs, the kind miners used to keep rhythm while they dug. But underneath the melody, I heard something else. The steady ring of pickaxes against stone, the scrape of shovels, the creak of wooden carts being pushed along rails. I turned a corner and stopped dead in my tracks. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber, maybe 50 feet across and 30 feet high, and it was full of miners. Transparent miners, ghost miners, working as if their lives depended on it. I could see right through them, but they were there. Dozens of men in old-style mining clothes with carbide lamps on their foreheads and coal dust covering their faces. They swung pickaxes that rang against the stone walls. They pushed cart after cart of coal toward a loading area. They worked with the steady, practiced movements of men who'd been doing this job for decades. And in the middle of it all, sitting on wooden crates like they belonged there, were 4 college students, very much alive, very much solid, working alongside the ghosts like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Hey," I shouted, "you 4! I'm here to get you out." They looked up at me with confused expressions. One of them, a young woman with blonde hair, waved. "We're almost done with our shift," she called back. "The foreman says we found the mother lode. Just need to dig a little deeper." That's when I noticed how they looked. Older. The boy who looked like a college freshman when he went missing now had lines around his eyes and gray in his hair. The girl's hands were black with coal dust, and when she coughed, I heard the wet, rattling sound that meant black lung disease. They'd been down here for 3 days, but they looked like they'd been working for years. A ghost materialized in front of me, more solid than the others, wearing a foreman's cap and carrying a clipboard. When he spoke, his voice sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "You looking for work, stranger? We can always use another good man. Pays fair, hours are long, but the coal's running rich and we're almost to the big vein." I tried to back away, but found I couldn't move my feet. The ghost foreman smiled, showing teeth black with coal dust. "Name's Morrison. Been running this operation since 1897. Best crew I ever had, even if most of them don't breathe anymore. But those young folks there, they're working out real well. Quick learners, strong backs. We might just make miners out of them yet." The college students had gone back to work, swinging pickaxes alongside the transparent dead. They didn't seem to realize anything was wrong. They didn't seem to remember they were supposed to leave. "Let them go," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "They don't belong here." Morrison laughed, a sound like rocks falling down a shaft. "Nobody belongs here, friend. But once you're part of the crew, you're family, and family sticks together. Forever." That's when I ran. I stumbled back through the tunnels, my helmet light bouncing wildly off the walls. Behind me, I could hear Morrison's laughter echoing through the stone, and underneath it, the steady sound of pickaxes and the singing of dead miners. The warm coffee cup was still in my hand, and I clutched it like proof of what I'd seen. But when I reached the sealed entrance, Dale wasn't there. "Dale!" I shouted into the radio. "Dale, come in!" Static, then a weak voice. "Jerry, where are you, man? I've been looking everywhere." "I'm at the mine entrance. Where are you?" "I'm down in the mine looking for you. Found your rope, but you weren't there. I'm in some kind of chamber with old equipment." My blood went cold. I was at the mine entrance. Dale was supposed to be waiting for me on the surface. If he was down in the mine, then who was talking to me? "Dale, get out of there now. Something's wrong with this place." "Can't find the way out, Jerry. Everything looks different down here. And there's people. Old miners. They want me to help them finish something." The radio went dead again. I dropped the coffee cup and ran back into the mine. This time I took the left tunnel, the one that should have led to empty chambers. But it didn't look the same as before. New passages had opened up, tunnels that weren't on any map I'd ever seen. And from somewhere deep in the mountain, I could hear Dale calling for help. I followed his voice through twisting corridors that seemed to stretch for miles. The walls were lined with mining equipment from different eras. Old pickaxes next to modern pneumatic drills, carbide lamps hanging next to electric fixtures. It was like walking through a museum of mining history, except everything looked ready to use. "Dale, keep calling. I'm coming for you." "Jerry, I'm in a big room. There's so much equipment here. They say they've been working on something important. They need help finishing it." I found him in a chamber that shouldn't have existed, a vast cavern filled with mining machinery from every decade since the 1890s. Steam-powered lifts stood next to electric conveyor belts. Horse-drawn carts sat beside modern trucks, and working among it all were hundreds of ghostly miners, all transparent, all busy with their eternal labor. Dale stood in the middle of it, holding an old mining pick. He looked up when I entered, but his eyes were different, older, tired, like he'd been working down here for years instead of minutes. "Jerry? Good you're here. Morrison says we're close to the big strike, the one they've been working towards since 1897. Just need a few more hands to break through the last wall." "Dale, we need to leave, now. Those aren't real miners." He looked at me like I was crazy. "Course they're real. Been talking to Morrison for the past hour. Nice fellow. Says this mine's been producing coal for nearly 80 years. Just needs the right crew to finish the job." I grabbed his arm, but he pulled away. "Can't leave now, Jerry. We're family here. Once you're part of the crew, you don't abandon your shift." That's when I realized Dale looked older too. Lines around his eyes, gray in his hair, coal dust ground so deep into his skin it looked like it had been there for decades. His uniform was different too. Instead of his state trooper clothes, he wore the rough work clothes of a 1970s miner. "Dale, listen to me. You're a state trooper. You have a wife, kids. You're not a miner." He stared at me for a long moment, confusion flickering across his face. Then Morrison Appy, eared beside him, solid as life, putting a ghostly hand on Dale's shoulder. "Don't listen to him, son. He's one of those surface people, doesn't understand the importance of the work. Been trying to shut down mining operations for years. But we know better, don't we? The coal won't dig itself." Morrison turned to me with eyes like black holes. "You can join us willingly, Ranger Coldwater, or you can join us the hard way. But you will join us. This mine's been calling to you since 1961, since your friends died in the collapse. You've always belonged down here with the rest of us." The ghostly miners stopped working and turned to look at me. Dozens of transparent faces, all smiling, all covered in coal dust, all dead. Some I recognized, Tommy and the other men who died in 61. Others were older, wearing the clothes of miners from the early 1900s. And some were newer, people I didn't recognize but who looked like they'd been dead for just a few years. "Welcome to the crew, Jerry," Tommy said, stepping forward with a pick in his hands. We've been waiting for you to come home." I ran again, but this time the tunnels seemed to fight me. Passages I'd taken before were blocked. New corridors opened up, leading deeper into the mountain. The warm air grew hotter, and I could smell sulfur now, like the mine was connected to something deep in the earth. Behind me, I heard the sound of hundreds of miners starting to work again, their pickaxes ringing against stone in perfect rhythm. And underneath it all, Morrison's voice echoing through the tunnels. "You can't escape the mine, Coldwater. Nobody escapes. We all have work to do, and it's not finished yet. Won't be finished until we reach the mother lode. The big vein that's been waiting down there since the world began." I found myself back in the chamber where the college students were working. But now there were more of them. Maybe a dozen young people, all working alongside the ghost miners, all looking years older than they should. And sitting in the corner, no longer trying to escape, was Dale. He'd picked you. PA shovel and was loading coal into a cart, whistling an old mining song. "Dale!" I called. He looked up and waved cheerfully. "Jerry, come join us. Morrison says we're close to breaking through. This could be the strike that makes us all rich." That's when I understood. The mine wasn't just haunted. It was alive. It fed on people, on their lives and their years, keeping them working forever while it slowly drained away everything that made them human. The ghost miners weren't just spirits of the dead. They were the mine's employees, trapped here to work for eternity. And now it wanted me. I could feel it pulling at my mind, showing me images of the coal vein that waited deeper in the mountain. Coal so pure and rich it would make a man wealthy beyond imagination. All I had to do was pick up a tool and start digging, just for a little while, just until we broke through to the mother lode. "No," I said out loud. "I'm not staying." Morrison materialized in front of me, but this time he looked angry. "Everyone stays, Coldwater. That's the rule. Once you're down here, you're part of the crew, forever." The mine began to shake. Dust fell from the ceiling, and I heard the ominous crack of support beams under stress. The ghost miners kept working, but their movements became more frantic, desperate, like they knew their time was running out. "You want to cause another cave-in?" Morrison snarled. "You want to kill all these people just because you're too proud to do honest work?" I looked at Dale, at the college students, at all the trapped souls working mindlessly in the ghostly mine. They were alive, but barely. The mine was slowly consuming them, and if I didn't do something soon, they'd end up like Tommy and the others, transparent spirits trapped forever in an eternal shift. That's when I made my decision. I was getting out, and I was taking as many people with me as I could carry. I had explosives in my pack, small charges we used for clearing rock slides, enough to maybe blast a new way out if I used them right. But first, I needed to break the mines, hold on the people it had trapped. "Listen to me," I shouted over the sound of pickaxes and machinery. "All of you, look at your hands." Some of the college students glanced down. Their hands were black with coal dust, aged and worn, like they'd been mining for decades instead of days. "You're not miners," I yelled. "You're students. You came here to study rocks, not to dig coal." A few of them stopped working, confusion creeping into their faces. But Morrison was there instantly, his ghostly form becoming more solid, more real. "Don't listen to him," Morrison commanded. "He's trying to trick you. You belong here. This is your life's work." "What year is it?" I asked the students. "What year?" One of them, a young man who looked like he'd aged 20 years in 3 days, spoke up. "Why? It's 1897, of course. We're working the Black Rock seam, trying to reach the mother lode before winter sets in." "It's 1975, I shouted. "December 1975. You're college students from West Virginia University." The mine shuddered around us, and Morrison's face twisted with rage. "Enough!" he roared. "You'll work or you'll die. Those are the only choices in the mine." That's when I realized the truth. Morrison wasn't just the foreman of a ghostly mining operation. He was the mine itself, the consciousness that had grown from decades of death and desperation, feeding on the life force of anyone who entered his domain. The 1897 disaster hadn't just killed 47 miners. It had created something hungry, something that needed workers to feed its endless appetite for coal and souls. "You died in 1897, I told Morrison. You and all your men. But you couldn't let go of the work. You turned this place into a trap, keeping people here to feed your obsession." Morrison smiled, showing teeth like broken coal. "Smart man. Yes, I died. We all died. Cave-in took us while we were so close to the biggest vein anyone had ever seen. But death doesn't stop the work. Death doesn't stop the need. The coal is still down there, coal water. More coal than you can imagine, and it's not going to dig itself." I backed toward the tunnel entrance, but ghostly miners moved to block my way. They weren't transparent anymore. They looked solid, real, dangerous. "You can't leave," Morrison continued. "None of you can leave. This mine has been hungry for 80 years, and now it's finally got enough workers to finish the job. We're going to dig until we reach the mother lode, even if it takes forever." "Dale!" I called to my partner. "Remember your family. Remember who you are." Dale looked up from his shovel, and for a moment I saw recognition in his eyes. "Jerry, what? Where am I? How did I get here?" That was my chance. I pulled the explosives from my pack and started setting charges against the support beams. If I could cause a controlled collapse, maybe I could break the mine's hold on its prisoners. "Stop him!" Morrison screamed. The ghostly miners rushed toward me, but they moved like they were underwater, slowed by the weight of decades. I finished placing the charges and grabbed Dale's arm. "We're leaving. Now." "What about the others?" Dale asked, his mind clearing. I looked at the college students. 2 of them seemed to be waking up, remembering who they were. But the other 2 were too far gone, their minds lost to the mine's influence. They kept working even as the ghost miners attacked me. "Run!" I yelled to the ones who could still hear me. "Follow me!" I triggered the first charge. The explosion echoed through the chamber like thunder, and one of the main support beams cracked. The ghostly miners screamed, a sound like wind through broken stones, and began to fade. But Morrison grew more solid, more real, as if the mine's desperation was giving him strength. "You'll kill us all!" he roared, lunging toward me with hands like chunks of coal. I dodged and set off the second charge. More beams cracked, and the ceiling began to sag. Water started, seeping through the cracks, groundwater that had been held back for decades. "The mine is flooding," Dale shouted. "We need to get out." 2 of the college students followed us as we ran for the tunnel. Behind us, Morrison's voice echoed through the collapsing chambers. "You can't escape. Nobody escapes the mine. We'll find you. We'll bring you back." The tunnel was collapsing behind us as we ran. I could hear the roar of rushing water and the screams of ghostly miners being swept away. But I could also hear Morrison's laughter, as if he knew something we didn't. We reached the sealed entrance just as the third charge went off. The explosion blew out the wooden barriers and sent us tumbling into the snow outside. Behind us, the mine entrance collapsed completely, sealing the hungry darkness forever. Dale and the 2 students lay in the snow, gasping and shaking. They looked terrible, aged, exhausted, marked by their time underground. But they were alive, and they were free. "The others?" one of the students whispered. "We left the others behind." I looked back at the collapsed mine entrance. Somewhere behind all that rock and debris, 2 college students were still trapped with Morrison and his crew of ghostly miners, still working, still digging, still searching for the mother lode that would never be found. "I'm sorry," I said. "I couldn't save them all." But even as I spoke, I could hear something that made my blood freeze. From deep underground, muffled by tons of rock, came the sound of pickaxes against stone. The mine was still active. Morrison and his crew were still working, and somehow I knew they always would be. The official report blamed everything on environmental hazards and exposure. 2 students found suffering from hypothermia and disorientation. 1 state trooper and 1 park ranger treated for shock. 2 students missing, presumed dead, in an accidental cave-in at an abandoned mine site. Dale retired from the state police 6 months later. He never talked about what happened in the mine, but sometimes I'd catch him staring at his hands like he was surprised they weren't black with coal dust. The 2 students we saved went back to college, but they changed their majors. Neither one could stand to be underground anymore. As for me, I handed in my ranger badge the day after we got out. Sarah didn't ask why. She could see it in my face, the way I jumped at every shadow, the way I couldn't sleep without checking that all the lights were on. The boys thought their dad had gotten soft, giving up his exciting job to become a mine safety inspector for the state. But they didn't understand that some jobs choose you. The mine entrance was sealed with concrete and steel, then covered with a monument to the miners who died there in 1897 and 1961. The area was declared off-limits to the public, officially due to unstable geological conditions. But the real reason was the seismic monitors we installed, because the mine isn't quiet. Every night, sensitive equipment picks up vibrations from deep underground, rhythmic sounds like tools striking stone. The geologists say it's natural settling, the mountain adjusting to the collapsed tunnels. But I know better. I know what those sounds really are. Morrison is still down there with his crew, and they're still working, still digging toward the mother lode that doesn't exist, driven by an obsession that death couldn't end. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind is right, people in the valley report hearing singing drifting down from the mountains, old mining songs carried on the air like voices from another time. The mine is patient. It's been patient for 80 years, and it can wait 80 more. It knows that eventually someone will be curious enough to break throughs. And those seals, some explorer or developer or foolish teenager will find a way in. And when they do, Morrison will be waiting with his eternal job offer. I drive past that sealed mine. Entrance every week is part of my safety inspections. The concrete barriers are solid, the steel reinforcement is holding, and the warning signs are clear. But sometimes I see fresh tire tracks in the dirt nearby, or I find hiking gear abandoned near the tree line. Sometimes people go missing in these mountains and we never find them. The official reports always blame bears or weather or simple accidents. But I know the truth. The mine is still hungry, and Morrison is still recruiting. Some debts can't be paid with money, and some work never ends. I keep the coffee cup on my desk at work, the impossible still warm cup I carried out of that ghostly mine. It's my reminder of what's waiting down there in the darkness. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I swear I can still smell fresh coffee brewing, and I hear the distant sound of pickaxes ringing against stone. The mine is patient, but it hasn't forgotten about me. It knows I escaped, and it knows I took some of its workers with me. Someday it might decide to collect what it thinks I owe. Until then, I keep watching the monitors, checking the seals, and making sure nobody else makes the mistake of going underground in search of something that should stay buried. Because I learned something important in those tunnels. Some jobs are more dangerous than they seem, and some workers never get to go home. The mountain is quiet tonight, but the seismic readings show activity deep underground. Morrison and his crew are hard at work, just like they've been for nearly 80 years. Still singing their mining songs, still swinging their ghostly pickaxes, still believing that the next strike will be the big one that makes it all worthwhile. And maybe, in their own way, they're right. Maybe the real mother lode isn't coal at all. Maybe it's the endless supply of souls that wander into the darkness, looking for something they'll never fit, and becoming part of a crew that never stops working. If you ever find yourself in the West Virginia mountains near Seneca Rocks and you hear singing on the wind or see warm light coming from abandoned mine shafts, remember my story. Remember that some places are hungry and some dead things refuse to stay buried. And whatever you do, don't go underground. Because down there in the darkness, Morrison is still hiring, and the job comes with a lifetime contract that nobody ever gets to break. The mine is waiting. It's always waiting. My name is Rebecca Thornwood, but everyone calls me Becca. I've been a park ranger here in Shenandoah for 9 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. Bears getting into campsites, lost hikers, the occasional drunk college kid trying to climb old rag and flip-flops. Normal stuff. Human stuff. I was the first woman to get the ranger job in this district back in '59. Had to prove myself every single day those first few years. The old-timers would watch me handle an angry black bear or talk down a panicked hiker, waiting for me to mess up. But I had my biology degree and 9 years of experience by 68, and I knew these mountains better than my own backyard. Old Rag Mountain was my specialty. Those granite boulders and oak forests were like a second home to me. I ran the wildlife rehab program from a little cabin near the base, taking care of injured owls and orphaned raccoons. The other rangers joked that I was more comfortable with animals than people, and they weren't wrong. It was late May when everything changed. The wildflowers were blooming something fierce that year, trilliums and bloodroot carpeting the forest floor like nature's own quilt. Perfect hiking weather, perfect weather for families to get in over their heads. I was radio checking the trail markers that Tuesday morning when the call came in. Static crackled through my handheld radio, then dispatcher Sarah's voice. "Becca, we got a missing child report. Family of 4 hiking the Old Rag Circuit. 8-year-old girl separated from the group about 2 hours ago." My stomach dropped. 2 hours was a long time for a kid to be alone up there. The temperature had been dropping at night, down to the mid-40s, and there were cliffs, lots of cliffs. "I'm 20 minutes from the main trail," I radioed back. "What's the last known location?" "Parents say she wandered off while they were taking pictures near the rock scramble. Name's Susan Davies. Blonde hair, blue jacket, pink sneakers." I knew that area. The rock scramble was where the real climbing started. House-sized boulders you had to squeeze between and climb over to reach the summit. Easy for an adult, but a nightmare maze for a scared 8-year-old. I'd handled missing kids before, usually found them within a few hours, cold and hungry but safe. Kids were tougher than people gave them credit for. But something felt different about this one. Maybe it was the way the forest had gone quiet that morning. No bird songs, no squirrel chatter. Even the insects seemed to be holding their breath. The Davies family was waiting at the parking area when I arrived. Mom clutching Dad's arm, both of them red-eyed and shaky. Classic case of parents who thought a nature hike would be easy, then realized they were in over their heads. "She just disappeared," Mrs. Davies kept saying. "1 second she was right behind us, the next..." She dissolved into tears. I got the details. Susan had been complaining about tired legs, lagging behind while her parents and older brother pushed ahead to get photos at a scenic overlook. When they turned around, she was gone. They'd called and searched for an hour before hiking back to get help. "Ma'am, I need you to know that kids are survivors," I told her, putting on my most confident ranger voice. "Your daughter's probably found herself a sheltered spot and is waiting for help. We're going to find her." But as I organized the search teams and contacted the rescue helicopter, that strange quiet in the forest kept bothering me. In 9 years, I'd never heard the mountains so silent. It was like every living thing was hiding. The old-timers around here had stories about Old Rag, native legends about a mountain mother who watched over lost children. Protective, spirit, they said, kept kids safe until their families could find them. I'd always figured those stories came from parents whose children had survived nights in the wilderness when they shouldn't have. People needed explanations for good luck. But standing there in that unnaturally quiet forest, organizing search teams for little Susan Davies, I felt something watching us from the trees, something big and old, and very interested in what we were doing. I shook off the feeling and focused on the job. Missing kid, possible hypothermia, rough terrain, standard search and rescue. Nothing I hadn't handled before. I should have trusted my instincts. We had 20 volunteers by noon, local Boy Scout leaders, mountain rescue team, a few experienced hikers who knew the area. I split them into groups and assigned sectors, keeping myself with the team heading to the rock scramble where Susan had disappeared. The forest stayed unnaturally quiet as we climbed. Our voices and radio chatter seemed muffled, like the trees were swallowing sound. Even our tracking dogs were acting strange, whining and pulling their handlers in circles instead of picking up a scent trail. "Dogs aren't finding anything, Becca," called out Jim Morrison, one of our best handlers. "It's like the kid just vanished into thin air." I knelt down and studied the ground around the last spot the family remembered seeing Susan. Soft earth between the rocks should have held footprints, but there was nothing. No disturbed leaves, no broken twigs, no sign that an 8-year-old had ever been there. Maybe she doubled back, suggested Mike Chen, a volunteer from the mountain rescue team. Kids get scared. They sometimes head for familiar territory. But I was studying the boulder field ahead of us. House-sized chunks of granite created a maze of narrow passages and hidden chambers. Perfect place for a scared child to get lost, or for something else to hide. That's when we heard it. A child's voice, thin and distant, calling, "Mommy, Mommy, where are you?" Everyone froze. The voice seemed to be coming, but from deeper in the boulder field, maybe a quarter-mile ahead. "Susan!" Mrs. Davies screamed, pushing past our search line. "Susan, we're coming!" But as we rushed forward, the voice moved. Now it was behind us. Then to our left. The sound bounced off the granite walls like an echo. But echoes don't change direction. "Sound carries weird up here," I told the group. But my mouth was dry. In 9 years of working these mountains, I'd never heard anything like it. We spread out and kept searching. The rescue helicopter made passes overhead, but the pilot radioed that the canyon walls were too steep for a clear view. We were on our own. Around 3 o'clock, we found the first real clue. I was squeezing through a narrow passage between two massive boulders when I spotted something pink wedged in a crack about 8 feet up the rock face. Susan's sneaker, just one. "How the hell did that get up there?" Mike Chen stared at the sneaker. Kid would need climbing gear to reach that spot. I borrowed climbing equipment from the rescue team and rappelled up to retrieve it. The sneaker was definitely Susan's, tiny with cartoon characters on the sides. But it wasn't scuffed or torn like you'd expect from a kid scrambling over rocks. It looked like it had been carefully placed in the crack, almost like someone had put it there for us to find. The helicopter pilot's voice crackled through my radio. "Ranger Thornwood, I'm seeing something odd down there. Large heat signature moving through the trees about half a mile north of your position. Too big to be the missing child." "What kind of heat signature?" I asked. "Hard to say. Shape's all wrong for a person, but it's definitely moving with purpose. And fast." I felt ice in my stomach. Black bears were common in the area, but they avoided people during the day. And the pilot said whatever he was seeing was moving fast and with purpose. "Usao. Could be mama bear with cubs," I radioed back. "Keep your distance." But I'd been working with bears for 9 years. I knew their patterns, their behaviors. Bears didn't pluck sneakers off children and place them 8 feet up rock faces. We kept searching until dark, following Susan's voice as it led us deeper into the boulder maze. But every time we got close, the calling would stop, then start again from a different direction. As sunset painted the granite walls orange and red, I made the hard decision to call off the ground search for the night. Too dangerous to navigate the rock scramble in darkness, even with flashlights. "We'll resume at first light," I told the Davies family. "Full search teams, thermal imaging, everything we've got." Mrs. Davies grabbed my arm. "She's only 8 years old. She can't survive another night out there." I wanted to reassure her, but that unnatural quiet in the forest was getting worse. And I kept thinking about that heat signature the pilot had seen. Something big, moving with purpose through the trees. As the volunteers headed back to their cars, I stayed behind to check the radio repeaters on the mountain. Standard procedure, but really, I wanted a few minutes alone to think. That's when I saw her. Just a glimpse through the trees as I was testing the radio on the north face. A small figure in a blue jacket, maybe 100 yards away, walking calmly between the massive oaks. "Susan!" I called out, dropping the radio and crashing through the underbrush. "Susan, stop!" But by the time I reached the spot, there was nothing. No footprints. No disturbed vegetation. Just that same oppressive silence hanging over everything like a blanket. I stood there in the growing darkness, heart hammering, and realized I was no longer sure what we were dealing with. Missing children didn't disappear without leaving tracks. They didn't call from impossible locations, and they definitely didn't calmly walk through wilderness at night like they owned the place. Something was very wrong on Old Rag Mountain, and tomorrow We were going back up there to find it. The search resumed at dawn with twice as many volunteers. Word had spread through the community, and people were coming from as far as Charlottesville to help find Susan Davies. I coordinated 3 separate teams while the helicopter made grid searches overhead. But the forest was still wrong. If anything, the unnatural quiet had gotten worse overnight. Even the rescue dogs were refusing to work, pulling back toward the parking area instead of following scent trails. "Never seen anything like it," Jim Morrison told me, wrestling with his German Shepherd. "Rex here has found dozens of missing people. Now he won't even enter the boulder field." I was studying topographic maps with the helicopter pilot when Mike Chen's team radioed in from the east face of the mountain. "Becca, you need to get up here. We found something." Mike's voice had a strange tone. Not excitement, not fear, but something in between. I grabbed my climbing gear and headed for their position, a steep section of granite cliffs about a mile from where Susan had disappeared. What they'd found was impossible. A shelter. Not some random pile of sticks a lost child might have thrown together, but an actual constructed shelter. Walls of carefully placed stones, roof of woven branches and moss. Inside were beds made from soft leaves and pine needles, arranged in neat rows like a nursery, and children's belongings, lots of them. "This stuff's from different time periods," Mike said, holding up a rotted sneaker that looked like it was from the 1950s. "And look at this." He showed me a small collection of items laid out on a flat rock like offerings. A plastic doll with faded hair. A toy truck with rust eating the metal. A more recent item, a child's digital watch, still ticking. "How many kids do you think have been up here?" asked Jenny Walsh, one of our newer volunteers. I was counting bed spaces. 7 small sleeping areas, each carefully constructed and maintained. This wasn't the work of lost children. This was someone taking care of lost children. "We need to document everything and get this information to the sheriff," I said. But my hands were shaking as I took photographs. 7 children. How many families had lost kids on Old Rag over the years? How many had we failed to find? That's when we heard the singing. A lullaby, soft and wordless, drifting down from higher up the mountain. Female voice, deep and rich, with an odd echo that made it hard to pinpoint the source. "Is that?" Jenny started to ask. "Mommy?" Susan's voice cut through the lullaby. "Mommy, I'm okay. The nice lady is taking care of me." This time the voice was clear and close, coming from directly above us, maybe 50 feet up the cliff face. But when we looked up, all we could see was solid granite wall. "Susan," I shouted. "Can you hear me? This is Ranger Becca. Where are you?" The lullaby stopped. Then Susan's voice again, but fainter. "She doesn't want me to talk to strangers. But I'm safe, Mommy. She's keeping me safe." Mike Chen was already unpacking climbing ropes. "There's got to be a cave system up there, hidden entrance." But as he started setting anchors for the climb, something hit the cliff face about 10 feet to his left. A rock the size of a basketball, thrown with enough force to chip granite. We all looked up. Nothing visible on the cliff above us. Another rock, bigger this time, smashed into the ground where Jenny had been standing. She jumped back just in time. "We need to move," I said. "Now!" But as we gathered our equipment, the rock throwing got worse. Not random throws, deliberate targeting. Every time one of us got close to the cliff face, rocks would rain down from above. Perfect accuracy, like someone was aiming. Someone with a very good view of what we were doing. We retreated to safer ground and radioed for the technical climbing team. If Susan was up there, we needed professional equipment and expertise to reach her safe. While we waited, I kept thinking about that shelter. 7 beds, 7 missing children, cared for by someone who knew how to live in the mountains. Someone who could throw rocks with deadly accuracy and move without being seen. The lullabies started again around noon, drifting down from multiple locations on the cliff face. Beautiful voice, but there was something ancient about it. Something that belonged to the mountains themselves. Ranger Thornwood. The helicopter pilot's voice came through my radio. I'm getting that large heat signature again. Actually, make that 2 heat signatures. 1 large, 1 small, moving together through the boulder field below your position. I grabbed binoculars and scanned the rocks below us. Nothing visible, but the pilot had thermal imaging. He could see what we couldn't. Direction of movement? I asked. Heading toward the waterfall on the north face. There's a lot of vegetation there. Good cover. The waterfall. I knew that area. Steep cascade dropping into a deep pool surrounded by thick forest. Perfect place to hide. Or to take someone you wanted to keep hidden. Mike, Jenny, we're moving, I called out. Everyone else, hold position and keep the Davies family back at base camp. We worked our way through the boulder maze toward the sound of falling water. The forest grew thicker as we descended, massive oaks and maples creating a green canopy that blocked most of the sunlight. Ancient trees, some of them probably standing when the first Europeans arrived in Virginia. The waterfall was beautiful, 30 feet of white water tumbling over granite into a pool so clear you could see the bottom. But as we approached, I noticed something that made me stop dead. Footprints in the mud beside the pool. Human prints, but wrong. Adult-sized, but the proportions were off. Too wide, too long, with what looked like claw marks at the tips of the toes. And beside the large prints, small ones. Child-sized sneaker treads, fresh enough that water was still seeping into the impressions. Jesus Christ, Mike whispered. What? Kind of animal leaves prints like that? I was studying the tracks when Jenny grabbed my shoulder. Look, she said, pointing to the waterfall. Behind the cascade, barely visible through the rushing water, was an opening in the rock face, a cave entrance hidden by the waterfall itself. And in that cave, moving back and forth like someone pacing, was a shadow. Human-shaped, but massive, easily 8 feet tall, with arms that reached nearly to the ground. As we watched, a smaller shadow joined the large one, child-sized. The 2 shadows embraced, and we heard that lullaby again, muffled by rushing water, but unmistakably coming from the cave. We found them, Jenny breathed. But I was looking at those impossible footprints in the mud, thinking about 7 beds in a carefully constructed shelter, remembering stories the old-timers told about things that lived in the deep mountains. We hadn't found them. They had been waiting for us. The technical climbing team arrived within an hour. 3 specialists with enough rope and equipment to scale the White House. But when I showed them the waterfall cave, team leader Mark Stevens just shook his head. That's not a climbing job, Becca. That's a swimming job. Someone's got to go through the pool and behind the waterfall to reach that entrance. The water was deep and shockingly cold, even in late May. Mountain runoff that stayed near freezing year-round. But it was the only way to reach Susan. I'll go, I said. I know these mountains better than anyone, and I've worked with traumatized children before. Mark started to argue, but we could hear Susan's voice from inside the cave, singing along with that deep, impossible lullaby. She was alive, and she sounded happy. Not scared or hurt, but genuinely content. That worried me more than screaming would have. I stripped down to my uniform shirt and pants, waterproofed my radio and flashlight, and waded into the pool. The cold hit me like a physical blow, but I pushed through the numbing shock and swam toward the waterfall. The water thundered over my head as I felt along the rock face for the cave entrance. My hands found an opening just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. I took a deep breath and pulled myself inside. The cave was larger than I'd expected. My flashlight beam revealed a natural chamber maybe 20 feet across, with passages leading deeper into the mountain. The walls were covered with drawings, childish artwork in charcoal and clay, depicting stick figures and animals, and what looked like a very large woman surrounded by smaller figures. And there was Susan Davies. She was sitting on a bed of soft moss and leaves, clean and healthy, wearing fresh clothes that definitely weren't the ones she'd disappeared in. Her blonde hair had been braided with wildflowers. She looked like she'd been living here for months, not 2 days. Beside her sat something that shouldn't have existed. 12 feet tall, covered in coarse dark hair, with arms that reached nearly to the ground. Female, definitely female, with breasts and wide hips built for childbearing. Her face was almost human, intelligent eyes, expressive mouth, but scaled up to match her massive body. She was braiding Susan's hair with gentle, careful fingers. "Hello," Susan said when she saw me, as calm as if I'd knocked on her bedroom door. "Are you here to visit? Mama doesn't usually like visitors, but you seem nice." The creature, I couldn't think of her as anything else, looked up at me with eyes that held more intelligence than I was comfortable with. Not animal intelligence, human intelligence, ancient and patient and completely focused on me. "Susan," I said carefully, "your parents are looking for you. They're very worried." "I know," Susan said. "But Mama says parents sometimes lose their children in the mountains, and when that happens, she takes care of them until they're old enough to take care of themselves." The creature made a soft sound. Not quite speech, but definitely communication. Susan nodded like she understood perfectly. "She says you can visit, but you can't take me away. This is my home now." I looked around the cave and saw more evidence of long-term habitation. Stores of nuts and berries, fresh water collected in natural stone basins, and in the deeper passages, I could hear other voices, children's voices. "How many kids are back there, Susan?" "6 others. Mama found all of us when we got lost. Tommy's been here the longest, since before I was born, he says. But we're all happy here. We're a family." The creature was watching me intently, and I realized she was evaluating me as a threat. Not to herself, she was easily powerful enough to break me in half, but to her children, because that's what they were to her, her adopted children, collected from the mountains over decades. I keyed my radio, hoping it would work through the cave walls. "Base camp, this is Becca. I've found Susan. She's alive and unharmed." Static. Then Mike Chen's voice. "Copy that, Becca. We're coming in." "Negative," I said quickly. "Stay back. The situation is complicated." But it was too late. I could hear splashing from the pool outside, voices getting closer. The creature heard it too, and her whole demeanor changed. The gentle maternal figure became something else, something protective and dangerous. She stood to her full height, and in the confines of the cave she looked even more massive. Susan moved closer to her, not afraid but clearly claiming her protection. "Mama doesn't like strangers," Susan said. "She only trusts people who understand about taking care of children." Mike Chen's voice echoed from the cave entrance. "Becca, you okay in there?" The creature let out a sound that was part growl, part roar, part something else entirely. The cave walls shook, and loose rocks fell from the ceiling. Gee. In the deeper passages, children started crying. "She's scared," Susan said. "People try to take her children away, and she doesn't understand why." I was beginning to understand the situation. This creature, this mountain mother, had been collecting lost children for decades, maybe longer. In her mind, she was rescuing them from parents who couldn't keep them safe in the wilderness. She was being maternal, protective, nurturing, and we were the threat. "Mike, back off," I radioed. "Do not enter this cave." But Mark Stevens was already squeezing through the entrance, climbing gear rattling, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The creature saw him and went completely still, the kind of stillness that comes right before an explosion. "Holy shit," Mark breathed when his light found her. That's when she moved. Faster than anything that size should have been able to move, she crossed the cave and grabbed Mark by his climbing harness. I heard bones crack as her massive hands closed around his chest. He screamed once, then went silent. She carried him to the cave entrance and threw him out into the pool with enough force that I heard the impact echo off the far wall. "Mama, no!" Susan was crying now. "He wasn't going to hurt us." But the creature was past listening. She blocked the cave entrance with her body and let out another roar that shook dust from the ceiling. From outside I could hear shouting, radio chatter, the sound of people running. "She won't hurt you," Susan said, grabbing my hand. "But she won't let you leave either, not if you're going to bring more people back." I looked into the creature's ancient eyes and saw the truth. She wasn't evil. She wasn't even really wild. She was a mother doing what mothers do, protecting her children from what she saw as danger. The problem was, we were the danger. Mark Stevens died in that pool, his chest crew, shed by hands that could have snapped trees. The rescue teams pulled his body out while I negotiated with a creature that shouldn't have existed, trying to find a solution that would save everyone. It took 6 hours. 6 hours of sitting in that cave, talking to Susan and the 6 other children the mountain mother had collected over the years. Tommy Hendricks, missing since 1952. Maria Santos, gone in 1961. 4 others, all taken as children, all raised in these caves as part of something that wasn't quite human family, but wasn't animal pack either. They were happy. That was the hardest part to accept. These children who'd been mourned and searched for and given up for dead, they were genuinely, completely happy. The mountain mother had given them something their original families couldn't: absolute safety, unconditional love, and a place where they would never be lost or abandoned again. But they were still human children, and some part of them remembered the world outside. "I miss ice cream," Susan admitted while the creature dozed in the afternoon heat. "And television. And my brother Jake, even though he's mean sometimes." The negotiation happened in gestures, simple words, and emotional communication that somehow transcended language. The mountain mother understood that Susan's parents were suffering. She understood that taking children caused pain. But she also understood that children got lost in her mountains, and lost children died without protection. The compromise we reached wasn't perfect, but it was workable. The mountain mother would return Susan and the 3 youngest children, those who'd been with her less than 5 years and still had strong connections to the outside world. In exchange, the Park Service would establish new safety protocols, mandatory supervision for children under 12 in the wilderness areas, better trail marking, regular patrols of the areas where children were most likely to get lost. And we would leave her alone. No more searches of her territory. No more attempts to study or capture her. The deep wilderness around the waterfall would be quietly designated as off-limits to the public. Tommy Hendricks and Maria Santos chose to stay. They'd been with her too long, become too much a part of her world. The mountain mother had raised them from children to adults, and this was their home now. We agreed to list them as presumed dead in official records, while quietly ensuring they had access to basic medical supplies and other necessities. The hardest part was explaining Mark Stevens' death. Climbing accident was the official cause. Equipment failure during a rescue attempt. His family never knew he died trying to separate a mother from her children. Susan Davies returned to her family with carefully constructed memory gaps. Exposure-induced trauma, the doctors called it. She remembered being lost, remembered being scared, but the details of her rescue were fuzzy. Her parents never questioned why she sometimes hummed lullabies in a language no one could identify, or why she insisted on sleeping with her bedroom door open so Mama can check on me. I kept my job, but everything changed for me after that day in the cave. I'd seen something that challenged every assumption I'd made about the natural world, about the boundaries between human and animal, about what it meant to be a mother. The mountain mother still lives in those caves behind the waterfall. I check on her territory during my regular patrols, leaving small offerings of food and supplies near the hidden entrances to her domain. Sometimes I catch glimpses of her moving through the trees at dusk, or hear her lullabies echoing off the granite walls. Children still get lost in Shenandoah National Park, but not in her territory. Not anymore. Parents who ignore the new safety protocols find their children gently guided back to marked trails by something they never quite see clearly. Rangers investigating reports of missi, and kids in the Old Rag area often find them sleeping peacefully in natural shelters, watched over by something that stays just outside the range of their flashlights. The old-timers were right about the mountain mother. She is a protector of lost children, but protection sometimes means keeping what you love close, even when others don't understand. I never told anyone the complete truth about what happened that day. How could I? Who would believe that something ancient and powerful lives in our national parks, raising human children with the patience and devotion of the world's most dedicated mother? But sometimes, late at night when I'm alone in my ranger station, I think about those children who chose to stay. About Tommy and Maria, now adults, living lives we can't imagine in caves we'll never map. About the mountain mother herself, patient and eternal, waiting for the next lost child who needs the kind of love she has to give. The mountains keep their secrets. And sometimes, those secrets are the most beautiful and terrible truths we'll ever encounter. My name is Rebecca Thornwood, and I've been keeping that secret for 7 years now. Some things are too important to share with a world that wouldn't understand. Some mothers will do anything to protect their children, even if those children aren't quite human, even if that mother isn't quite human either. My name is Marcus Ironwood, but everyone calls me Mark. I've been a park ranger for 12 years now, working the Cumberland Gap area where Kentucky, Tennessee, and Virginia all come together. It's beautiful country, but it can be lonely. Real lonely. I was sitting in my office that August morning when the call came in. The heat was already pushing 90 degrees, and it wasn't even 9 o'clock yet. My radio crackled to life. "Ranger Ironwood, this is District. We need you to take a meeting with some federal folks." Federal folks. That usually meant trouble. 20 minutes later, 2 men in cheap suits walked into my office. The older one was DEA Agent Collins, gray hair and tired eyes. The younger one never gave his name. "We need your help with something," Collins said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "There's been unusual activity in the wilderness area near Tri-State Peak." I knew the area. Remote. Hard to reach. Perfect for people who didn't want to be found. "What kind of activity?" "Marijuana cultivation, we think. Maybe more. Local informants won't talk about it. They get scared when we ask questions." That didn't surprise me. Mountain folks had their own ways, their own rules. They'd been hiding from government men for 200 years. "We need someone who knows the land," the younger agent said. "Someone who can move quiet." I'd learned to move quiet in Vietnam. Different jungle, same skills. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "Reconnaissance," Collins said. "Get eyes on whatever's happening in that hollow. Don't engage. Just observe and report." He slid a map across my desk. Red circle marked around an area I'd never explored. The maps called it Deserters Hollow, named for the Civil War soldiers who'd hidden there to avoid fighting. "Why won't your informants talk?" Collins and his partner exchanged a look. "They say it's haunted," the younger one said. "Bunch of mountain superstition." I'd heard the stories. Every old-timer in the Gap had tales about that hollow. Melungeon ghost stories, I'd always figured. The mixed-race mountain people had good reasons to want outsiders to stay away. "When do you want me to go?" "Tomorrow morning. Early." After they left, I studied the map. The hollow sat in a natural bowl between 3 ridges, accessible only by foot through thick forest. According to the topographical lines, there was a creek running through it, probably seasonal given the drought we'd been having. I'd grown up in these mountains before Vietnam changed everything, before my marriage fell apart, before I started living alone in these ranger quarters trying to forget things that wouldn't stay forgotten. The heat wave had been going on for 3 weeks. Everything was dry as kindling. Even the old-growth forest felt brittle, like it might crack if you looked at it wrong. Perfect fire weather, which meant I'd been on edge for days. That evening I called my ex-wife Linda in Lexington. Our son Tommy answered. "Hey, Dad." "Hey, kiddo. How's summer vacation?" "Okay, I guess." He was 15 now, all awkward angles and cracking voice. "Mom says you might visit soon." "Maybe. Work's been busy." "Yeah, Mom told me. She says you're still chasing ghosts in the mountains." Linda had never understood why I came back here after the divorce, why I chose this job over something that paid better in the city. "Just keeping the mountains safe," I said. "From what?" Good question. Sometimes I wasn't sure myself. After we hung up, I sat on my porch as the sun went down. The heat had everyone's windows open, and I could hear families having dinner, kids playing. Normal sounds of normal people living normal lives. In the distance, heat lightning flickered over the mountains. No rain, just the promise of it. The air mellowed like dust and dying leaves. I'd been having the dreams again lately, Vietnam dreams, the kind that left me sweating and confused about what year it was, the kind that made me check the locks twice before bed. Maybe that's why Collins thought I was right for this job. Maybe he could smell the war on me, recognize a fellow traveler in the dark places. I packed my gear that night: water, compass, binoculars, camera, radio, standard reconnaissance load, light and quiet, just like Sergeant Morrison had taught us before we learned that the jungle had its own rules. As I was getting ready for bed, I noticed something odd. All the night sounds had stopped. No crickets, no owls, no rustling in the underbrush. Just silence, thick and heavy as the heat. I stepped outside and looked toward the mountains. In the distance, where Deserters Hollow lay hidden in its bowl of ridges, I could swear I saw a faint glow, like firelight, but steadier. Probably just heat lightning reflecting off something, or my imagination. But as I watched, the glow pulsed once, twice, then faded away. I left my cabin at 5 the next morning, before the heat could build. The trail to Tri-State Peak was an old one, probably used by Cherokee hunters before white settlers arrived. It wound through thick forest, following ridgelines and creek beds that had been dry for weeks. 3 hours in, I reached the overlook where I could see down into Deserters Hollow. Through my binoculars, it looked normal enough. Dense forest, a few clearings, the dry creek bed winding through the center. But there was something wrong with the light down there. It seemed thicker somehow, like looking through water. I found a game trail leading down into the hollow. Deer sign was old, maybe weeks. Even the animals were avoiding this place. The temperature dropped as soon as I entered the tree line. Not much, maybe 10 degrees, but enough to notice. My radio started crackling with static. "Base, this is Ranger Ironwood, beginning descent into target area." Nothing but static came back. I tried my compass. He needle spun lazy circles, couldn't find magnetic north. Equipment failure wasn't uncommon in these mountains. Mineral deposits could play hell with navigation gear. But my watch had stopped too. The second hand sat frozen at 8:23. I marked my entry point with a torn piece of shirt tied to a branch and continued down the game trail. The forest felt wrong, too quiet, too still. The trees grew closer together than they should, their branches weaving overhead like a ceiling. That's when I saw the first building. It sat in a clearing about 50 yards ahead, visible through the trees. A cabin, but not like the tourist reconstructions in the national park. This one looked lived in, fresh. Smoke was coming from the chimney. I approached carefully, using trees for cover. Through my binoculars, I could see details that made my skin crawl. The cabin was built in 1860s style, but the wood looked new. The stone chimney showed no weathering. Even the mud chinking between the logs looked fresh. A woman emerged from the cabin. She wore a long dress, the kind you'd see in Civil War movies. Her hair was pinned up under a bonnet. She carried a wooden bucket to what looked like a well. I checked my camera, made sure it was loaded with film. The DEA would want evidence of whatever operation was running here. But when I looked through the viewfinder, the cabin seemed to flicker. One moment it was there, solid and real. The next, it was just empty forest. I lowered the camera. The cabin was there again. The woman had disappeared. I moved closer, staying low. The clearing was maybe an acre, surrounded by forest on all sides. Besides the cabin, I could see other structures, a barn, a smokehouse, what looked like a blacksmith shop, and people, lots of people. Men in Confederate gray uniforms, but faded and patched. Women in long dresses and bonnets. Children playing with wooden toys. They moved around the settlement, going about their daily business like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like they'd been doing it for over 100 years. I tried the radio again. Still nothing but static. My watch was still stopped. But according to the sun's position, hours had passed. The light was all wrong for mid-morning. A horse whinnied somewhere behind me. I spun around, hand moving instinctively to where my sidearm would have been if I'd been carrying one. 3 men on horseback sat watching me from maybe 30 feet away. They wore Confederate uniforms and carried rifles. Old rifles. The kind that used paper cartridges and took forever to reload. but these rifles were pointed at me. "Well, well," the middle rider said. His voice had a thick mountain accent. "Look what wandered into our little valley." I stood slowly, hands visible. "I'm a park ranger. I'm investigating reports of illegal activity." The three men laughed. The sound was wrong somehow. Too harsh, too knowing. "Illegal activity," the leader repeated. "That's a good one, Union Boy." Union Boy. I was wearing my Park Service uniform, complete with badges and patches. No way they could mistake me for a Civil War soldier. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," I said. "No misunderstanding," another rider said. This one was younger, maybe 20. He had fever-bright eyes and a hole in his jacket that looked like it had been made by a bullet. "We've been expecting you." "Expecting me?" "Captain Morrison said you'd be coming. Said you'd try to run like you always do." Captain Morrison. My sergeant in Vietnam had been named Morrison, but that was impossible. These men couldn't know about that. "You're confused," I said. "I'm not who you think I am." The leader spurred his horse closer. Up close, I could see that his uniform was wrong. The gray fabric looked too new, but it was cut with bullet holes. Dark stains that looked like old blood decorated the chest and sleeves. "We know exactly who you are, Marcus Ironwood. The question is, do you know who we are?" Before I could answer, and the world tilted. Not physically, but something deeper. Like reality itself had shifted a few degrees off-center. When my vision cleared, I was standing in the middle of the settlement. People surrounded me, all wearing clothes from the 1860s. Men, women, children. All staring at me with expressions that mixed curiosity and hunger. "Welcome to Deserters Hollow," the mounted leader said. He'd dismounted and was standing right beside me. "Population 43. Well, 44 now." I tried to step backward. My feet wouldn't move. "What do you want?" "Same thing we've always wanted," he said. "To go home. But home don't exist anymore, does it? So we make do with what we can find." A woman approached, carrying a cup of what looked like water. She was young, maybe 25, with dark hair and sad eyes. "Drink," she said. "You must be thirsty after your long walk." I was thirsty. The heat and the long hike had dehydrated me, but something about her smile made me hesitate. "Where am I really?" I asked. "You're home," she said. "You've been running for so long. Time to rest." The cup smelled like creek water, clean and cool. I realized how much I wanted to drink it, and realized that wanting it was the last thing I should do. I knocked the cup from her hands. It shattered on the ground, but no water spilled out. Instead, something thick and dark pooled in the dirt. Something that moved. The woman's sad smile never changed, but her eyes went black. Completely black, like staring into a well at midnight. "That wasn't very polite," she said. The mounted leader laughed. "They never drink it the first time. Remember Jimmy? Took us 3 days to convince him." Jimmy. I looked around the crowd of faces and saw him near the back. A young man in modern clothes, but they were faded and torn. He wore a DEA jacket and his hair was gray at the temples, even though his face looked 25. "How long have you been here?" I called to him. Jimmy stared at me with empty eyes. When he spoke, his voice was hollow, like an echo of an echo. 3 weeks, he said. "Or maybe 30 years. Time works different here." The leader clapped me on the shoulder with a hand that felt too cold, too strong. "Jimmy was just like you. Federal man, came sniffing around where he shouldn't. Took a while, but he came to understand. They always do." I tried to move away from his grip. My feet still wouldn't obey me. "Let me go." "Can't do that. You see, we got ourselves a problem. Been stuck in this valley since 1863 when we decided we'd had enough of dying for other men's causes. Deserted, they called it. Like wanting to live was something shameful." More people emerged from the buildings. Too many people for the size of the settlement. Men in various uniforms, Confederate, Union, some I didn't recognize. Women in clothes from different decades. Children who moved too quietly and stared too long. We found this place during the war, the leader continued. Hidden valley, where time moves slow. Perfect place to wait out the fighting. But time got stuck. And so did we. A little girl tugged at my sleeve. She wore a dress from the 1950s and carried a doll with no face. Are you going to stay and play with us? She asked. I looked down into her eyes. They were the same bottomless black as the woman's. For how long? Forever and ever, she said, and giggled. The crowd pressed closer. I could feel their hunger now, a physical thing that made my skin crawl. They wanted something from me, something important. What happens if I stay? You join us, the leader said. Add your time to ours. Help us maintain the bubble that keeps this place real. And if I leave? You can't leave. Not anymore. Soon as you set foot in our valley, you became part of it. Only question is whether you do it willing or we make you. I tested my feet again. Still wouldn't move. But I could feel sensation returning to my toes, like circulation coming back after sitting too long. There has to be a way out. Only one way, Jimmy said from the back of the crowd. But you won't like it. The leader shot him a sharp look. Shut up, Jimmy. What way? I pressed. Jimmy's empty eyes focused on me for just a moment. In that moment, I saw desperation, pain, and something that might have been hope. Fire, he whispered. Fire breaks the... His words cut off as the leader gestured. Jimmy's mouth kept moving, but no sound came out. Jimmy talks too much, the leader said. Always has. Don't mind him. Fire. I thought about the drought, the dry forest, the heat lightning I'd seen the night before. Fire could work, but it would burn everything, including me. The little girl was still tugging on my sleeve. Will you teach me songs? She asked. The last man knew pretty songs. He sang them while he cried. What happened to him? He got old, she said matter-of-factly. They always get old, but we stay the same. I looked around at the faces surrounding me. Some looked like they'd been here for years. Others seemed fresher, newer. All of them had those black, hungry eyes. How many people have you trapped here? Not trapped, the woman with the broken cup said. Rescued, saved from time and change and death. Jimmy's been here 3 weeks and he looks 50. Time moves different for everyone, the leader explained. Depends on how much you fight it. Jimmy fought hard, real hard. Cost him. The sensation was returning to my legs now. Whatever was holding me was weakening. Maybe because I wasn't drinking their water, maybe because I wasn't giving in to despair. Or maybe they were just playing with me. I need to think about this, I said. Course you do. That's natural. Tell you what, why don't you rest up in one of our cabins? Get some food in you, wash the trail dust off. We'll talk more tomorrow. Tomorrow? In a place where time didn't work right? What did tomorrow even mean? The crowd parted to let me walk. My feet worked again, but every step felt like walking through thick mud. The settlement around me flickered occasionally, showing glimpses of empty forest underneath the buildings. They led me to a small cabin near the edge of the clearing. Inside, it was furnished like a Civil War-era home. But some of the details were wrong. Electric outlets with no electricity, a telephone with no wires, modern items trying to disguise themselves as period furniture. Rest now, the woman said. Tomorrow we'll show you how nice it can be here. How peaceful. After they left, I tried the door. It opened easily, but when I looked outside, the settlement was gone. Just trees and shadows and that wrong, thick light. I stepped back inside and shut the door. When I opened it again, everything was back to normal. I was trapped in a nightmare that looked like a history lesson, but Jimmy had given me a clue. Fire. I started searching the cabin for anything that could burn. I found matches in a tin box on the mantelpiece. Real wooden matches, the kind they don't make anymore. But when I struck one, the flame was wrong. Instead of yellow-orange, it burned pale blue and gave off no heat. Everything in this place was a lie, wearing the mask of truth. I sat on the bed and tried to think. In Vietnam, when we got trapped behind enemy lines, Morrison always said the same thing. Don't panic. Assess. Plan. Execute. Assessment. I was trapped in some kind of temporal bubble with people who'd been dead for over a century. They were feeding off time itself, using visitors to maintain their existence. Plan. Jimmy had said fire would work. Real fire. Not the cold blue flames these people used. Execute. That was the problem. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. The little girl with the faceless doll stood outside. "Supper time," she announced. I followed her to what looked like a community dining hall, long wooden tables filled with people. The food looked normal enough. Cornbread, beans, what might have been dear me, chat, but everything had that same wrong quality as the blue flames. I sat where they indicated and pretended to eat. The food had no taste, no substance. It was the idea of food rather than food itself. "You're not eating," the leader observed. He sat at the head of the main table like some kind of feudal lord. "Not very hungry." "That's the thing about this place," he said. "After a while, you don't need much. Food, sleep, even air becomes optional." Jimmy sat at the far end of the table, mechanically moving his fork from plate to mouth and back again. He'd aged even more since this morning. Gray streaks in his hair had become solid silver. "Tell me about the fire," I said quietly. The leader's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "What fire?" "The one Jimmy mentioned. The one that breaks whatever spell you've got on this place." Conversations around the table stopped. Everyone turned to look at me with those black, hungry eyes. "There's no fire," the woman said. "Fire is dangerous. Fire destroys." "That's exactly what I'm counting on." The leader set down his fork carefully. "You don't understand what you're saying. This place is sanctuary, haven from the world's cruelty. We've built something beautiful here." "You've built a prison." "For who? Us? We're free here, free from time, from aging, from death." "What about Jimmy? What about all the others you've trapped?" "They chose to stay." "Did they? Or did you make them?" The little girl giggled. "He's funny. The last funny man burned up real good." The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees in an instant. Everyone's breath came out in white puffs. "Sarah," the leader said sharply, "don't talk about that." But Sarah wasn't done. "He had matches too, real matches from the outside. Made pretty orange fire that hurt to look at." "What happened to him?" "He went away," Sarah said sadly. "All the fire people go out. That's why we don't like fire." I understood now. Real fire from the outside world could disrupt whatever was keeping this place stable. But it came at a cost. "How do I make real fire?" The leader stood up, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. "You don't. You're going to stay here with us. Add your years to our years. Help us keep the dream alive." "What if I refuse?" "Then you'll age like Jimmy, fast and hard until there's nothing left but an empty shell. But you'll still be here, still part of us." I looked around the table at all the faces. How many were willing prisoners? How many had fought like Jimmy and lost? "There is another option," a voice said from the back of the room. A man stepped out of the shadows. He was tall, gaunt, wearing a Union Army uniform that looked like it had seen real battle. His eyes weren't black like the others. They were blue, tired, but human. "Colonel Morrison," the leader said. "We thought you were resting." Morrison, like my sergeant in Vietnam. But this man was older, from a different war entirely. "I've been resting for 120 years, Morrison said. "I think that's long enough." He walked to my table and sat down across from me. "You're not the first, Marcus, they've tried to trick. There have been others over the years. Other soldiers from other wars. What happened to them?" "Same thing that'll happen to you if you don't get out of here. They become part of the collective. Add their time, their memories, their pain to the pool that keeps this place running." The leader was moving toward us now, along with several others. But Morrison held up a hand and they stopped. "I outrank you, Lieutenant." I always have. The leader's face twisted with rage, but he stepped back. Morrison leaned across the table. Listen carefully. This place feeds on temporal displacement. Every person who enters adds to its power. But there's a way to reverse the flow. How? Sacrifice. Someone has to stay behind and burn it down from the inside. Use real fire to destroy the foundations that hold the time bubble to get her. That's suicide. Yes, but it's the only way to free everyone else. The only way to make sure this trap never catches anyone again. I thought about Jimmy, aging decades in weeks. About all the other faces around the table, all the other people who'd wandered into this place and never left. About my son Tommy, who was still young enough to believe his father might be a hero. I'll do it. Morrison nodded grimly. I figured you would. You've got that look. Same look I had when I realized what had to be done. But you didn't do it. No, I was a coward. Told myself I could find another way, that someone else would come along who was stronger. He looked around the room at all the trapped faces. Been telling myself that for over a century. I pulled out my matchbook. The matches looked normal, but I knew they'd burn cold and blue like everything else in this place. These won't work, will they? No, but I've got something that will. Morrison reached into his jacket and pulled out a small leather pouch. Inside was a single wooden match, but this one was different. It seemed to glow with its own light, warm and orange. Real fire, he said, from the real world. I've been saving it for when I finally got the courage. Where did you get it? From the last man who tried to burn this place down. He dropped it when the flames took him. I've been carrying it ever since, waiting for someone brave enough to use it. The leader and his followers were getting agitated. They pressed closer, but something about Morrison kept them at bay. Here's what you need to know, Morrison said quickly. Once you light that match, you'll have maybe 5 minutes before the temporal field collapses completely. Anyone still in the valley when that happens will be released back to their proper time. But whoever's holding the flame burns with it. Yes. I took the match. It felt warm in my palm, like holding a piece of sunshine. There's another way, the woman pleaded. Stay with us. Be happy. Be at peace. I thought about peace. About my nightmares from Vietnam, my failed marriage, my son who barely knew me. Maybe peace wasn't such a bad thing. Then I looked at Jimmy, hollow-eyed and aging, and knew that this wasn't peace. It was surrender. I'm sorry, I said, and struck the match. The match flared with brilliant orange flame, and the entire world screamed. Not a sound exactly, but something deeper. Like reality itself was crying out in pain. The flame burned hot and true, casting shadows that danced and writhed like living things. The settlement around me began to flicker more rapidly. Buildings appeared and disappeared. People faded in and out of existence. The only constant was the flame in my hand and the growing heat that spread from it. Stop! The leader shouted. His Confederate uniform was smoking now, the fabric turning to ash at the edges. You don't know what you're doing. But I did know. For the first time since entering this place, I knew exactly what I was doing. I walked to the center of the dining hall and touched the flame to a wooden beam. The fire spread instantly, hungrily, consuming the false reality that surrounded us. But this wasn't normal fire. It burned through time itself, unraveling the web that held the temporal bubble together. The people around me were changing. The black hunger in their eyes was fading, replaced by confusion, then relief, then terror, as they remembered who they really were and how long they'd been trapped. Thank you, Morrison said. His Union uniform was burning away, revealing the man underneath. Young again, maybe 25, with hope in his eyes for the first time in over a century. Tell my Mary, if you make it out, tell her I finally came home. Then he was gone, not burned, but simply released, fading like smoke into whatever waited beyond this place. The fire was spreading faster now. I could feel it in my bones, in my blood. The match had burned down to my fingers, but I couldn't feel pain anymore, only warmth and a strange kind of peace. Jimmy appeared beside me, looking younger with each passing second. "The entrance," he gasped. "Follow the creek bed. It leads to a gap in the ridge. You might still have time." "What about you?" "I'm already gone," he said, and smiled. The first real smile I'd seen in this place. "Been gone for 3 weeks. This is just borrowed time." He faded away like the others, released back to whatever fate awaited him. The building around me was collapsing now, but not into rubble, into emptiness, into the truth of what this place really was. Just an empty hollow in the mountains where time had gotten tangled and twisted. I ran for the door, my clothes smoking, my skin burning. The match was gone, but the fire it had started was inside me now, consuming the temporal bonds that held me to this place. Outside, the settlement was dissolving. Buildings melted like ice in summer heat. The people were gone, all of them, released to their proper times and fates. The only sound was the roar of impossible fire eating through the fabric of trapped time. I found the creek bed and followed it, running uphill as the hollow collapsed behind me. The fire was catching up, or maybe I was turning into fire myself. Hard to tell the difference anymore. The gap in the ridge appeared ahead of me, a narrow opening between two massive boulders. I threw myself through it just as the world behind me exploded into orange flame and released time. I hit the ground rolling on the other side in normal forest under normal sky. My watch was working again. 2:47 p.m. The radio crackled with static, then cleared. "Ranger Ironwood, this is Base. Please respond." I keyed the microphone with shaking hands. "Base, this is Ironwood. I'm okay. Thank God. You've been missing for 6 hours. We were about to send a search team." 6 hours, not days or weeks or decades. Just 6 hours. I looked back at the gap in the ridge. There was nothing there now but empty forest and afternoon shadows. No hollow, no settlement, no trace that anything had ever existed in that space. But I could still smell smoke on the wind. I retired from the Park Service 3 months later, took my pension, and moved to Lexington to be closer to Tommy. Started teaching him about the mountains, about their beauty and their dangers. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I dream about Deserters Hollow, about the people I helped free and the price that freedom cost, about Morrison and Jimmy and all the others who'd been trapped in that bubble of twisted time. The official report said I'd gotten lost in the heat and suffered from dehydration-induced hallucinations. The DEA never found any marijuana operation. The area was eventually declared off-limits due to unstable geological conditions. But sometimes, when I'm driving through the mountains with Tommy, he'll point to a distant ridge and ask, "What's over there, Dad?" And I'll tell him, "Nothing, son. Nothing at all." Because some places are better left empty. Some fires burn so hot they leave nothing behind but clean earth and the promise that no one will ever be trapped there again. The hollow men are gone now, all of them. Free to find whatever peace waits beyond the boundaries of time and memory. And sometimes, that's the best ending you can hope for. My name is Samuel Bloodworth, but everyone just calls me Sam. I've been a park ranger for 11 years now, working up here in the Black Mountains of North Carolina. People think being a ranger means I just drive around in a truck all day, maybe help some lost hikers find their way back to the trail. But the truth is, I do a lot more than that. I used to be an Army medic, so the Park Service keeps me busy with what they call disease vector control. That's a fancy way of saying I make sure sick animals don't spread their problems to people. It was late August in 1970 when everything started going wrong. The weather had been hot and sticky for weeks, the kind of humid air that makes your clothes stick to your skin even when you're just sitting still. I was stationed up near Mount Mitchell, the highest peak east of the Mississippi River. Most folks don't know that, but it's true. Up there, the air gets thin and the fog rolls in thick as cotton. On a clear day, you can see for miles. On a bad day, you can't see your own hand in front of your face. I lived alone in a small cabin about 2 miles from the weather station. My wife, Margaret, died from cancer 3 years before, and our daughter Jenny was staying with her grandmother in Asheville for the summer. The quiet didn't bother me much anymore. After 11 years of watching over these mountains, I'd gotten used to the sounds: wind through the spruce trees, the call of ravens, the distant rumble of thunder rolling through the valleys. The mountains had their own rhythm, their own heartbeat. I knew when something was off. That morning I was driving my usual patrol route when I spotted the first dead deer. It was lying beside the trail that leads up to the old settlement ruins, about 3 miles from my cabin. Nothing unusual about finding a dead animal in the woods. Happens all the time. But when I got out to take a look, something felt wrong. The deer wasn't torn up like it would be if a bear or mountain lion had gotten to it. There were no bullet wounds, no obvious injuries at all. It just looked like it had laid down and died. Its eyes were still open, staring up at the trees with a glassy look that made my skin crawl. I'd seen plenty of death during the war and in my years as a ranger. This felt different. I loaded the deer into my truck and drove to the ranger station to call it in. My supervisor, Bill Henderson, had been working these mountains longer than anyone. When I described what I'd found, he was quiet for a long moment. "How many years you been up there now, Sam?" he asked. 11 this October. "Then you know animals die all the time. Could be anything. Disease, old age, poison berries." But I could hear something in his voice. Bill knew these mountains better than anyone, and he sounded worried. "I want you to keep an eye out for more," he said. "And Sam, if you find any more dead animals, don't touch them with your bare hands. Use gloves, bag everything up proper. We might need to send samples to the state lab." "You think it's something serious?" Bill was quiet again. Then he said, "These mountains got a long memory, Sam. Sometimes things come back around." I didn't know what he meant by that, but I followed orders. Over the next 3 days, I found 6 more dead animals. 3 deer, 2 black bears, and a raccoon. All of them had that same peaceful look, like they'd just decided to lie down and stop breathing. No wounds, no signs of struggle, just death. On the 4th day, I got a call from the state health department. They were sending someone up to investigate reports of sick hikers in the area. 2 people had been taken to the hospital in Asheville with what the doctors were calling unknown neurological symptoms. Both had been hiking near Mount Mitchell the week before. The woman they sent was Dr. Rachel Kim, an epidemiologist from the CDC. She was young, maybe 30, with short black hair and serious eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She showed up at the ranger station driving a white government sedan that looked completely out of place on our mountain roads. "Ranger Bloodworth," she said, getting out of her car, "I'm here about the animal deaths and the sick hikers." I helped her load her equipment into my truck, boxes of sample containers, testing gear, and a cooler full of ice packs. As we drove up toward Mount Mitchell, I told her about the animals I'd found. "Any pattern to the locations?" she asked, making notes in a small notebook. "All within about a 5-mile radius of the old settlement ruins," I said. "Place called Whitmore Hollow. Been abandoned since the 1870s. She looked up from her notebook. "What happened there?" "Some kind of sickness, from what I heard. Killed most of the people living there. The survivors just packed up and left." Dr. Kim was quiet for a moment, staring out at the misty mountains. "How often does this happen? Animals dying like this?" "Never seen anything like it," I said. "But Bill Henderson, he's been here longer than anyone. He said something about things coming back around." "What did he mean?" I shrugged. "Don't know. Bill doesn't talk much about the old days." We spent the rest of the morning collecting tissue samples from the dead animals I'd found. Dr. Kim worked carefully, wearing thick gloves and a face mask, sealing each sample in its own container. She was thorough, professional, but I could see the confusion in her eyes. Whatever was killing these animals, it wasn't anything she'd seen before. That evening, we sat on the porch of my cabin, drinking coffee and watching the fog roll in between the trees. The mountains were quiet, except for the sound of wind through the leaves. "In all your time up here," Dr. Kim said, "have you ever heard stories about this place? Local legends, old superstitions?" "You mean ghost stories?" "Anything that might explain a recurring pattern of illness or death." I thought about it. Mountain people had always been full of stories, tales about things in the woods, spirits that didn't rest easy, places where the living shouldn't go. My grandmother used to tell me stories about the mountain fever, a sickness that would sweep through the hollows every few decades, taking whole families at a time. But I was a man of science, trained in medicine and disease prevention. I'd always figured those old stories were just ways for people to explain things they didn't understand. Poor hygiene, contaminated water, diseases we now had names for. Just old superstitions, I told her. People making up stories to explain things they couldn't understand. Dr. Kim nodded, but she kept staring out into the dark woods. Maybe, she said, but something's happening up here. Something that doesn't fit any pattern I know. That night I lay in bed listening to the sounds outside my cabin. The usual night sounds. Owls, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, the creak of tree branches in the wind. But underneath it all, there was something else, a feeling more than a sound, like the mountains themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. I didn't sleep much. The next morning, Dr. Kim's test results came back from the lab, and they made no sense at all. She called me over to the ranger station where she'd set up her equipment, her face pale and confused. "Sam, look at this," she said, pointing to a printout from one of her machines. "These tissue samples are showing markers for at least 3 different pathogens: bacterial, viral, and something else I can't identify." "Is that unusual?" "It's impossible," she said. "Animals don't get infected with multiple diseases like this simultaneously. Their immune systems would fight one or the other, not just give up to everything at once." She showed me more printouts, graphs with lines that spiked and dropped in patterns that looked more like music than medical data. And these readings keep changing. I run the same sample twice. I get different results each time. Equipment malfunction? That's what I thought. But I've triple-checked everything. The machines are working fine. She sat down heavily in her chair. "Sam, in 15 years of doing this job, I've never seen anything like it." That afternoon, we drove up to Whitmore Hollow to examine the old settlement ruins. The road ended about a mile from the site, so we had to hike in through thick woods. The trees seemed different here, older, darker, with branches that twisted in strange directions. Even in the middle of the day, the canopy was so thick that it felt like evening. The ruins weren't much to look at. A few stone foundations, the remains of what might have been a church, some old gravestones so weathered you couldn't read the names. But there was something about the place that made my skin crawl. The air felt heavy, oppressive. No birds sang. No insects buzzed. Even our footsteps seemed muffled, like the ground was swallowing up the sound. "This is where all the dead animals were found?" Dr. Kim asked. "Within a few miles, yeah. The deer yesterday was right over there beside that old foundation." She was taking pictures, making notes, collecting soil samples. Professional, as always. But I could tell the place was getting to her, too. She kept looking over her shoulder like she expected to see someone watching us. We spent about an hour documenting the site. As we were getting ready to leave, Dr. Kim found something that made her stop cold. Hidden under a pile of old stones was a metal box, green with age but still intact. Inside was a leather journal, its pages yellow and brittle but still readable. "Property of Dr. James Whitmore," she read from the first page. "Medical observations, Whitmore Hollow, North Carolina, 1873. We carefully carried the journal back to the ranger station. That evening, by the gate of kerosene lamps, we read through Dr. Whitmore's entries. What we found made my blood run cold. The first entries were normal medical notes. Births, deaths, common illnesses. But as the months went on, Dr. Whitmore's writing became more frantic, more desperate. June 15th, 1873. The Hendricks boy shows the same symptoms as the others. Fever, followed by what can only be described as waking dreams. He speaks of seeing his dead grandfather, claims the old man is calling to him from the woods. I have administered laudanum, but his condition worsens. June 20th, 1873. 7 more cases today, all showing identical progression. Fever, hallucinations, then a peaceful death that comes too easily, as if they welcome it. Mrs. Patterson spoke of beautiful music calling her home. Her husband found her walking toward the woods in her nightgown at 3 in the morning. July 2nd, 1873. I begin to suspect this is no ordinary disease. The afflicted speak of shared visions, of voices that call to them in languages they do not know but somehow understand. They die with smiles on their faces, as if going to meet old friends. July 15th, 1873. God help us all. I have seen it myself now. In the woods beyond the settlement, shapes that move between the trees. They do not walk as men walk. They call with voices like singing, like music made of moonlight and memory. I understand now why the others went willingly. July 20th, 1873. I am the last. The others have all gone into the woods, drawn by the singing. I have barricaded myself in my house, but I can hear them calling. My dear wife, my children, all of them singing together now. They want me to join them. They say there is no pain there, no sorrow, only peace eternal. July 22nd, 1873. I cannot resist much longer. The music grows stronger each night. I see them in my dreams, all those I have lost. They are happy there, in that place beyond Tum, and the trees. Why do I fight it? What is left for me here? The final entry was barely legible, the handwriting shaky and rushed. I go to them now. If anyone finds this record, know that we died not from disease, but from something far older, something that has always been here in these mountains. It feeds on sorrow, on loss, on the love that refuses to let go. Beware the singing in the woods. Beware the voices of the dead. Dr. Kim set the journal down with shaking hands. Sam, this describes exactly what's happening to the hikers. The neurological symptoms, the hallucinations. It's just an old man's ravings, I said, but even as I spoke the words, I didn't believe them. People back then didn't understand mental illness, disease progression. They made up supernatural explanations for things they couldn't comprehend. But that night, as I lay in my cabin trying to sleep, I heard it for the first time. Soft at first. So quiet I thought it might be the wind through the trees, but slowly it grew clearer. Music floating through the forest, not quite singing, not quite instrumental, something that seemed to come from the mountains themselves. It was beautiful, hauntingly, heartbreakingly beautiful. And underneath the melody, I could swear I heard a voice I recognized, Margaret's voice, calling my name. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. The music stopped. The next morning, I told myself it had been a dream. But when I met Dr. Kim at the ranger station, I could see in her eyes that she'd heard it too. We need to talk to the hikers who got sick, she said. Find out exactly what they experienced. We drove down to Asheville to the hospital. The first hiker, a man named Robert Chen, was conscious but barely responsive. He stared at the ceiling with a dreamy expression, occasionally mumbling words we couldn't understand. The second hiker, a woman named Patricia Mills, was more coherent. When we asked her about her experience on the mountain, her eyes filled with tears. "My brother," she whispered. "I saw my brother Danny. He died in Vietnam 2 years ago, but he was there in the woods, calling to me. He looked so happy, so peaceful. He wanted me to come with him." "Where did you see him?" Dr. Kim asked gently. "Near some old stone ruins. There was music. The most beautiful music I've ever heard. Danny was singing along with it. He said everyone was there, everyone we'd ever lost. He said they were waiting for us." Patricia grabbed Dr. Kim's hand. "You have to understand. It wasn't scary. It was wonderful. I wanted to go with him. If the other hikers hadn't found me and brought me down from the mountain, I would have followed him into the woods. I still want to." As we drove back up the mountain, Dr. Kim was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, "Sam, what if Dr. Whitmore was right? What if this isn't a disease in any conventional sense?" "You're a scientist," I said, "yeah. You don't believe in ghosts and spirits. I believe in evidence, she replied. And the evidence says something is up there that we don't understand. Something that affects brain chemistry in ways that make people see and hear things. Something that's been doing it for over 100 years. That evening, we both heard the music again. This time, it was closer, clearer. And this time, we both heard voices we recognized. For me, it was Margaret, singing the lullaby she used to sing to Jenny when she was small. For Dr. Kim, it was someone she wouldn't tell me about, but I could see the tears in her eyes. We have to go up there, she said, to the ruins. We have to see what's really happening. That's exactly what everyone else did, I reminded her, and they all died. But even as I said it, I knew we were going to go. The music was calling to us, and despite everything we knew about the danger, it was getting harder and harder to resist. We went up to Whitmore Hollow the next morning, armed with every piece of scientific equipment Dr. Kim could carve. The EMF detectors, air quality monitors, recording devices, anything that might help us understand what we were dealing with. I brought my service revolver, though I wasn't sure what good it would do against something that had been killing people for over a century. The ruins felt different in daylight, still oppressive, still unnaturally quiet. But there was something else now. An expectancy, like the air itself was waiting for something to happen. Dr. Kim set up her equipment while I explored the remains of the settlement. Most of the buildings had been nothing more than log cabins, long since rotted away. But the stone foundations remained, marking out the shape of what had once been a thriving community. According to the old records, nearly 200 people had lived here in 1873. By the end of that summer, they were all dead or gone. In what had been the center of town, I found the remains of a well. The stone rim was still intact, though the opening had been covered with a rusted metal grate. When I peered down into the darkness, I could see water maybe 20 feet down, but there was something else floating on the surface, pale shapes that might have been bones. "Sam!" Dr. Kim called from across the clearing. "You need to see this." She was crouched beside her EMF detector, frowning at the readings. "This doesn't make sense. I'm getting massive electromagnetic disturbances, but they're not constant. They pulse, like a heartbeat." As she spoke, the needle on her device jumped wildly, then settled back to normal. A few seconds later, it happened again. The pattern was regular, rhythmic, like something breathing. "Could be underground minerals," I suggested. "Iron deposits, maybe." "Maybe," she said, but she didn't sound convinced. "Sam, I want to stay here tonight. Set up monitoring equipment. Record whatever happens after dark." "That's not a good idea. Everyone who's spent the night up here has either died or disappeared. Then we'll be the first to survive it. Look, whatever this is, it's not going to stop. More animals will die. More hikers weak. You'll get sick. We need to understand it if we're going to fight it." I wanted to argue, but I could see the determination in her eyes. And if I was honest, I wanted answers too. The music I'd been hearing, Margaret's voice calling to me. I needed to know if it was real or if I was losing my mind. We spent the afternoon setting up camp in one of the more intact stone foundations. Dr. Kim arranged her monitoring equipment in a circle around our sleeping bags while I gathered firewood and checked my radio. The static was worse than usual, but I managed to get through to the ranger station to let them know where we were. As the sun set behind the mountains, the temperature dropped fast. Mountain nights are always cold, even in summer, but this felt different. It wasn't just the absence of warmth. It was like the cold was alive, creeping through the trees with purpose. The music started just after midnight. It began as a whisper, so soft I thought it might be the wind. But gradually, it grew clearer, more distinct. Voices singing in harmony, a melody that seemed to come from the earth itself. Dr. Kim's equipment went crazy, needles spinning, digital displays flickering, her recording devices picking up sounds we couldn't hear with our ears. "My God," she whispered, staring at her instruments. "Sam, there are dozens of voices, maybe hundreds, all singing the same song." I could hear it now, too, and it was exactly as Patricia Mills had described. beautiful beyond words, hauntingly sad but somehow comforting. And underneath the melody I could make out individual voices. Margaret's voice, clear as day, singing the lullaby she'd hummed while cooking dinner or folding laundry. "Don't listen too closely," I warned Dr. Kim. "That's how it gets you." But it was already too late. She was standing now, her face turned toward the dark woods, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Misha." "Elle," she whispered. "Oh, Michael, I'm so sorry." "Who's Michael?" I asked. But she didn't answer. She was walking toward the tree line, drawn by the music like metal to a magnet. I grabbed down her arm, pulled her back. "No, you have to fight it. Remember what happened to the others." She blinked, shook her head as if waking from a dream. "My brother," she said. "Michael was my brother. He died when I was 12. Drowned in a lake while I was supposed to be watching him. I heard his voice, Sam. He was calling to me." The music was getting louder, more insistent. And now we could see lights moving between the trees, soft, pale lights that bobbed and swayed like lanterns carried by invisible hands. But they weren't lanterns. As they drew closer, we could see they were human shapes, translucent and glowing, walking through the forest as if the trees weren't there. "The equipment," Dr. Kim gasped, pointing at her devices. "Look at the readings." Every needle was buried in the red zone. Her digital thermometer showed the temperature dropping rapidly. 50 degrees, 40, 30. The EMF detector was screaming a constant alarm, and her audio equipment was recording sounds across the entire spectrum, frequencies that shouldn't exist. The glowing figures were at the edge of the clearing now. Men, women, children, all dressed in clothing from different time periods. Some wore the simple work clothes of 1870s mountain folk. Others were dressed like hikers from more recent decades. All of them were singing, their voices blending into that impossibly beautiful harmony. And in front of them all, I saw her. Margaret, looking exactly as she had the day she died. No longer wasted by cancer, but healthy and whole and smiling. She held out her hand to me. "Come home, Sam," she said, her voice cutting through the chorus like a knife through silk. "Jenny's here too. We're all here, waiting for you." Behind her I could see other faces I recognized. My parents, who'd died when I was young. Soldiers I'd served with in the war. All of them happy, peaceful, free from pain. It was not real, I told myself, but my feet were already moving toward them. It's some kind of hallucination, a neurological effect. Dr. Kim grabbed my arm. "Sam, no, look at the data. Whatever these things are, they're affecting local space-time, the temperature readings, the electromagnetic fields. This is real. They're really here." But I could barely hear her over Margaret's voice. She was singing our wedding song now, the one we'd danced to on our first anniversary. I could smell her perfume, feel the warmth of her hand in mine. "I've missed you so much," she said. "It's been so lonely without you. But you can end that now. You can come with us. Be with us forever." I was almost at the tree line when Dr. Kim did something that saved my life. She fired her flare gun straight up into the air, the sudden red light cutting through the darkness like a scream. The figures vanished instantly. The music stopped. The forest fell silent except for the sound of my own ragged breathing. "What the hell did you do that for?" I shouted, anger and loss tearing through me like physical pain. "Because they were killing you," she said. "Look at your hands." I looked down. My fingertips were blue with cold, and there were frost crystals forming on my jacket. If I'd taken another step toward those figures, I would have frozen to death. "They're not just spirits," Dr. Kim said, her voice shaking. "There's something else, something that feeds on life force, on the warmth of living things. They lure people in with visions of dead loved ones, then drain them dry." We spent the rest of the night huddled by our fire, too terrified to sleep. Dr. Kim's equipment continued to register anomalous readings until dawn, when everything suddenly returned to normal. As the sun rose, she packed up her gear with shaking hands. "We have to warn people," she said. "Close off this area, keep people away." But even as she spoke, I could see the doubt in her eyes. Who would believe us? How do you explain something like this to people who live in a world of science and reason? As we hiked back, Toward the ranger station, neither of us spoke about what we'd seen, but I knew we were both thinking the same thing. The entities, whatever they were, had shown us exactly what we wanted most. For me, it was Margaret and the family I'd lost. For Dr. Kim, it was the brother she'd failed to save. And despite everything we'd learned about the danger, despite knowing it would kill us, we both wanted to go back. The hunger in those mountains was older and stronger than human reason, and it was far from finished with us. 3 days later, Dr. Kim was missing. I'd driven down to the ranger station that morning to find her car still in the parking lot, but no sign of her anywhere. Her hotel room in town was empty, bed unslept in. All her equipment was still at the station, but her personal belongings were gone. Bill Henderson helped me search the obvious places, the trails, the campsites, the areas where hikers sometimes got lost. But I knew where she'd gone. I'd been fighting the same pull for 3 days, the constant whisper in the back of my mind telling me to go back to Whitmore Hollow, back to the music and the lights and Margaret's waiting arms. I found her that evening, sitting on a stone foundation in the center of the ruins. She was alive, but barely. Her lips were blue, her breathing shallow, and she was staring into the woods with the same dreamy expression I'd seen on the hiker in the hospital. "Rachel," I called, approaching slowly. "You need to come with me, now." She turned to look at me, and her eyes were completely different. Older somehow, filled with knowledge that didn't belong in a 30-year-old epidemiologist. "I understand now, Sam," she said, her voice eerily calm. "I've been talking to them, to all of them. Dr. Whitmore, the hikers, everyone who's ever come here. They're not dead, not really. They're part of something bigger now. Your hypothesis." "Ermic," I said, pulling off my jacket to wrap around her shoulders. "We need to get you warm, get you to a hospital." But she pushed the jacket away. "Listen to me. This isn't a disease, isn't some kind of natural phenomenon. It's a consciousness. An ancient intelligence that's been here since before humans walked these mountains. It feeds on life force, yes, but not in the way we thought." Her words were coming faster now, urgent. "It doesn't kill people, Sam. It preserves them, takes their life energy and incorporates it into itself. Everyone who's ever died here is still alive, still conscious, but part of this greater entity. They're trying to tell us something." "They're trying to kill us," I said, "just like they killed everyone else." "No!" She grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "They're trying to warn us. The entity is growing stronger, hungrier. It's been feeding on the occasional hiker, the lost traveler, for decades. But that's not enough anymore. It wants to spread beyond these mountains, to find new feeding grounds." As if summoned by her words, the music began again. But this time it was different, darker, more urgent. The temperature around us dropped 20 degrees in seconds, and I could see our breath misting in the suddenly frigid air. The glowing figures emerged from the woods, more of them than I'd ever seen before. Hundreds of translucent forms, all moving toward the center of the ruins where we sat. And leading them was Margaret. But she looked different now, sad, desperate, like she was trying to communicate something important. "Sam," her voice echoed in my head, "you have to listen. We don't have much time." Dr. Kim stood up, and I realized with horror that she was starting to become translucent too. The entity was taking her, absorbing her life force slowly so she could serve as a translator between the living and the dead. "The entity, I made a mistake," she said, her voice growing fainter. When it took Dr. Whitmore, it absorbed not just his life force, but his medical knowledge. When it took the other victims, it gained their memories, their experiences. Now it knows about the outside world. It knows how many people live in the cities below, how much life force is available there. The ghostly figures were all around us now, and I could hear their voices. Not singing this time, but speaking, all trying to talk at once. Warnings, pleas, desperate attempts to communicate. Margaret stepped forward, her form more solid than the others. "Sam, my love, you have to stop it. The entity is preparing to leave the mountains. It's going to spread to the valleys, the towns, everywhere people live. It will feed until there's nothing left." "How?" I asked. How do I stop something like this? Fire, Dr. Kim said, her voice now barely a whisper. The entity is tied to this place, to the physical remains of its victims. If you can destroy the focal point, the well in the center of town, you can trap it here, permanently. I looked at the old well, its stone rim now glowing with the same pale light as the spirits. What about you? What about all of them? We'll be free, Margaret said. Free to move on to whatever comes next. We've been trapped here for so long, unable to rest, unable to warn anyone. This is our chance. Dr. Kim collapsed then, her physical form flickering like a candle in the wind. The entity was taking her completely now, adding her knowledge to its vast collection of absorbed minds. But as she faded, she whispered one last thing. The flare gun, in my equipment bag. Use it on the well. I ran to where she'd dropped her gear, searching frantically as the ghostly figures pressed closer. The temperature was dropping rapidly now. My fingers were going numb, and ice crystals were forming on everything around me. The entity was trying to freeze me solid before I could act. The flare gun was at the bottom of the bag. I grabbed it, checked that it was loaded, and turned toward the wells. The spirits were between me and my target now, but they weren't trying to stop me. Instead, they were forming a protective circle, using their own energy to shield me from the entity's killing cold. Hurry, Sam! Margaret's voice cut through the chaos. It knows what you're trying to do. The well was maybe 30 feet away, but it felt like miles. Each step was a battle against the supernatural cold, against the entity's will pressing down on me like a physical weight. I could feel my strength leaving me, my life force being drained just like all the others. 20 feet, 15, 10. The spirits around me were starting to fade, their protective energy exhausted. I could see the entity's true form now, rising up from the well like a pillar of darkness shot through with veins of pale light. It was massive, ancient, hungry beyond human comprehension. And it was beautiful. Even as it tried to kill me, I could understand why people had walked willingly into its embrace. It offered peace, an end to pain and loss and loneliness. It offered reunion with everyone we'd ever loved. 5 feet from the well, I raised the flare gun. The entity spoke then, not in words, but directly into my mind. It promised me Margaret, promised me a life without grief or regret. All I had to do was lower the gun, accept its gift, become part of something greater than myself. For a moment, I almost did it. The offer was everything I'd wanted since Margaret died. But then I heard another voice, Jenny, my daughter, calling to me from somewhere far away. She was still alive, still needed her father. If I let this thing escape the mountains, she would be in danger. Everyone would be. I pulled the trigger. The flare hit the water at the bottom of the well and exploded in a burst of brilliant red light. The entity's scream shook the ground, a sound like the death of mountains. The pale spirits around had me brightened for a moment, their faces filled with gratitude and relief. Then they were gone. All of them, including Margaret. But as she faded, she smiled and mouthed the words, "Thank you." The ancient intelligence collapsed back into the well, its form dissolving into smoke and shadow. But I could feel it wasn't destroyed, just contained, trapped again in the place where it had always lived. The focal point was broken, its connection to the outside world severed. But the hunger remained. It would always remain, waiting in the deep places of the mountains for the next unwary traveler to hear its song. I found Dr. Kim's body the next morning, curled up peacefully beside the well, as if she'd simply gone to sleep. The coroner ruled it death by exposure, complicated by exhaustion and hypothermia. There was no mention of the supernatural, no official record of what had really happened up there. They transferred me to a different station after that, somewhere far from the Black Mountains. But I kept in touch with Bill Henderson, and he kept me informed about the area around Whitmore Hollow. The Park Service closed it off permanently, citing geological instability and recurring wildlife health issues. They put up warning signs and barriers, but I knew those wouldn't be enough to keep everyone out. Every few years, Bill would call me about another incident, a hiker who'd ignored the warnings, a researcher who'd thought they could solve the mystery where others had failed. They always found the bodies eventually, peaceful and unmarked, lying near the old well. And the survivors, when there were survivors, always told the same story. Beautiful music in the woods, voices of dead loved ones calling them home. I retired early and moved to Florida, as far from the mountains as I could get. But I still dream about that place sometimes. About Margaret's voice singing in the darkness, about the lights moving between the trees, about the ancient hunger that waits in the deep places of the world, patient and eternal. Jenny's grown now, with children of her own. I've never told her what really happened to her mother or why I left North Carolina so suddenly. Some knowledge is too dangerous to pass on. But I watch the news and sometimes I see stories that make my blood run cold. Missing hikers in remote areas, unexplained deaths in wilderness regions, reports of strange music heard in the woods at night. The entity in Whitmore Hollow is contained, but it's not the only one. There are old hungers in wild places all over the world, things that have been feeding on human life since our species first learned to walk upright. Most of them sleep, dreaming in the depths of caves or at the bottom of dark lakes. But sometimes they wake up hungry, and when they do, they sing. 3 months ago, Jenny called to tell me she was planning a hiking trip with her family. The Appalachian Trail, she said. She wanted to show her kids the mountains where their grandfather had worked. I told her to choose a different trail, any other trail. And when she asked why, I said what my grandmother used to say when she told stories about the mountain fever. Some hungers are too old and too strong to ever truly end. Best to just stay away from where they sleep. She laughed and said I was getting paranoid in my old age. But she changed her plans anyway. Maybe something in my voice convinced her, or maybe she just remembered enough of her mother's stories about the old mountain superstitions. I hope she never finds out which one it was. Because late at night, when the wind is blowing just right, I can still hear the music calling from somewhere far away. And sometimes, just sometimes, I hear Margaret's voice mixed in with the melody, warning me that the hunger never truly dies. It just waits. My name is William Riversong, but most folks just call me Will. I've been a forest ranger here in the Cherokee National Forest for 6 years now, and I thought I knew these mountains like the back of my hand. Boy, was I wrong. It was October 1955, and the leaves were just starting to turn. Red and gold covered the hills like a blanket, and the air had that crisp bite that made you want to breathe deep. I was stationed up at the fire tower on Unicoi Mountain, about 20 miles from the nearest town. My job was simple: watch for smoke, check on hikers, and make sure nobody got lost in the wilderness. I should tell you something about myself that matters for this story. My grandmother was Cherokee. She died when I was 12, but before that, she filled my head with old stories about these mountains. Stories about the Nunehi, the immortal ones who lived in the hills and helped lost travelers. They sing to guide people home, she used to say, but only the worthy can hear their songs. Back then, I figured it was just make-believe. Stories to teach kids to respect nature. I was wrong about that too. My wife Sarah was Cherokee too, a school teacher down on the reservation. We'd been married just 8 months, and she was expecting our first baby. Every night I'd climb down from that tower and call her on the phone line that ran from my cabin to town. "Any singing in the hills today?" she'd tease. "Just the wind," I'd always answer back. The morning everything changed, started like any other. I climbed the 120 steps to the top of my tower, checked the radio equipment, and scanned the horizon with my binoculars. The forest stretched out in all directions. Thousands of acres of oak and pine, with little streams cutting silver lines through the valleys. Around 10 o'clock, the phone rang. It was Sheriff Morrison from town. "Will, I need your help," he said, and I could hear the worry in his voice. "Got 5 hunters who didn't come back from their weekend trip. They were supposed to be back in Knoxville yesterday night." "Where were they hunting?" I asked, already reaching for my map. "Somewhere up near Bald Mountain. Group of lawyers from the city. They rent the same cabin every year. Problem is, we got that early snow 2 days ago. They might be stuck up there." I looked out my window at the white patches on the higher peaks. The weather had turned fast. Sunny and warm on Friday, then 6 inches of snow by Saturday night. It happens sometimes in these mountains, but not usually this early. "I'll head up there this morning," I told him. "Any idea which trails they were using?" "That's the thing, Will. Nobody's seen hide nor hair of them. Their car's still at the cabin, but their gear's gone. It's like they just walked into the woods and disappeared." After I hung up, I felt that first little chill. Not from the cold, from something else. In 6 years of ranger work, I'd found plenty of lost hikers. Usually they stayed close to the trails, got turned around, and ended up walking in circles. But experienced hunters from the city, they should have known better. I packed my gear: first aid kit, rope, extra food, and my grandmother's old compass. She'd given it to me when I was 16, right before she died. "This will always point you toward home," she'd said, "even when you don't know where home is." The hike up to Bald Mountain took 3 hours. The trail was muddy from the melted snow, and I could see boot prints heading off into the thick woods. 5 men, just like Sheriff Morrison said. But here's what bothered me. Their tracks were heading straight toward the old Cherokee lands, the places my grandmother had told me never to go alone. As I followed their trail deeper into the forest, I started hearing things. No, ET voices exactly, but something like singing, soft and far away, like it was coming from the hills themselves. I stopped and listened, but every time I tried to focus on it, it faded away. The trees were different here too, thicker, older, with bark that looked almost black. And there were flowers blooming, bright blue and white ones that shouldn't have been growing in October. My grandmother had told me about flowers like these. "They only bloom where the Nunnehi walk," she'd said. But I shook off those old thoughts. I had a job to do. 5 men were missing, and their families were probably worried sick. Whatever I was hearing, whatever I was seeing, it could wait. I had to find those hunters before dark. The singing got louder as I walked deeper into the woods, and that's when I knew this wasn't going to be like any other rescue I'd ever done. The hunters' tracks led me off every trail I knew. After 4 hours of walking, I was in parts of the forest I'd never seen before, even after 6 years of working these mountains. The trees grew so thick overhead that even at midday it felt like evening down on the forest floor. I stopped to rest by a little creek and check my map. According to the compass, I was heading northeast, but my map showed nothing but empty green space in this direction. No trails, no campsites, no landmarks at all, just wilderness. That's when I met Matthew Bearclaw. I was kneeling by the water, filling my canteen, when I heard someone walking through the leaves behind me. I turned around and saw a Cherokee man about my age, dressed in hunting clothes and carrying an old rifle. "You're following the city hunters," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir. I'm Will Riversong, forest ranger." I stood up and offered my hand. "Sheriff Morrison asked me to help find them." Matthew looked at me for a long moment, then shook my hand. "I know who you are. Your grandmother was Mary Riversong. She was my great-aunt's friend." He paused. "I'm Matthew Bearclaw. The tribal council sent me to find you." "Find me? Why?" "Because those hunters walked into places they shouldn't have gone, and because you're going to follow them." He looked serious, worried even. "The elders want you to come back. They say the hills are singing again." There it was, that word again, singing, just like my grandmother used to say. "I can hear it too," I admitted. "But I have to find those men." Matthew nodded slowly. "I know. That's why I'm here to help you. But Will, you need to understand something. Your grandmother never told you the whole truth about the Nunnehi. She was trying to protect you." We started walking again, following the boot prints. Matthew moved through the forest like he'd been born there, never making a sound, never leaving a mark. I tried to match his quiet steps, but compared to him, I sounded like a bear crashing through the woods. "What did she not tell me?" I asked. "The Nunnehi aren't just helpers. They're guardians. They protect places and people and times. Sometimes, when the world gets too dangerous for the Cherokee way of life, they create safe places, hidden places. As he talked, I noticed the forest was getting stranger. The flowers were everywhere now, those bright blue and white ones that shouldn't exist, and the trees were huge, bigger than any I'd seen in Tennessee. Some of them had to be hundreds of years old. "Matthew," I said, stopping in my tracks, "look at these boot prints." He knelt down beside me. The hunter's tracks were still clear in the soft dirt, but now there were other prints mixed in with them, barefoot prints, and they looked old, not like they'd been made recently, but like they'd been there for years. "Cherokee," Matthew said quietly, "but not from our time." The singing was getting louder now. I could make out different voices, men and women, singing in Cherokee. It was beautiful and sad at the same time, like a song for people who were lost and couldn't find their way home. We followed the mixed tracks for another hour. The forest kept changing around us. The air felt warmer, and the light filtering through the trees had a golden quality, like late summer instead of October. Some of the trees had marks carved into them, Cherokee symbols that looked fresh, even though they were cut into bark that had to be centuries old. Then we found the first piece of modern gear. It was a hunting knife, dropped right in the middle of the trail. A good knife, expensive, with J. Morrison carved into the handle. One of our missing hunters. But next to it, half buried in the leaves, was something else. A Cherokee arrowhead made from flint and still sharp as the day it was made. "This is wrong," Matthew said, picking up both items. "These things shouldn't be in the same place." "What do you mean?" "I mean that arrowhead is old, really old. My grandfather might have made one like it, but this..." He held it up to the light. "This was made before the white man came. Before there were any cities or lawyers or hunting knives like this one." As he spoke, the singing stopped. The forest went completely quiet. No birds, no wind, no insects, nothing. It was the kind of silence that makes your ears ring and your heart beat too fast. Then we heard voices, real voices, speaking in Cherokee, coming from somewhere ahead of us through the trees. Matthew grabbed my arm. "Those are the missing hunters," he whispered, "but they're not alone." We crept forward, moving from tree to tree. Through the thick branches, I could see a clearing ahead. Smoke was rising from what looked like a campfire, and I could hear people talking and laughing. But when we got close enough to see into the clearing, what we found made no sense at all. There were our 5 missing hunters sitting around a fire. They looked happy and relaxed, not lost or scared. They were eating what looked like venison and talking with a group of Cherokee men and women. The Cherokee people were dressed like they'd stepped out of a history book. Leather clothes, traditional jewelry, low tips, nung braids. And the strangest part? The clearing we were looking at shouldn't have existed. According to my map, we were standing in the middle of thick forest. But here was an open space with a village, real Cherokee houses made of wood and bark, gardens full of corn and beans, everything my grandmother had described from the old days. "Matthew," I whispered, "what is this place?" He was staring at the scene like he'd seen a ghost. "I think," he said slowly, "we just found where the Nunahai live. And I think those hunters aren't lost anymore. I think they're home." That's when one of the Cherokee women by the fire looked up and stared right at us. She smiled and said something in Cherokee to the others. Then she stood up and walked toward our hiding spot. "She's coming over here," I said. "I know," Matthew replied. "And Will? I don't think we can run from this. I don't think we're supposed to." The woman stopped about 10 feet away from us. She was young, maybe 25, with kind eyes and traditional Cherokee tattoos on her arms. When she spoke, it was in perfect English. "William Riversong," she said, "son of Mary's daughter. We've been waiting for you to find us." The Cherokee woman's name was Rose Walking Bear, and she led us into the clearing like we were expected guests. As we got closer to the village, I could see it was much bigger than I'd first thought. Houses and gardens stretched back into the trees, with paths connecting everything together. Smoke rose from several fires, and I could smell bread baking and meat cooking. The 5 missing hunters looked up as we approached. They were sitting with Cherokee men around the main fire, and they all looked different, calmer, like they'd been here for months instead of days. "Will!" called out one of them. James Morrison, the sheriff's brother. Thank God you found us, but you're not going to believe where we are. Where exactly are we? I asked, though I was starting to suspect the answer wouldn't make much sense. We're home, said another hunter, a man I didn't recognize. We're finally home. Rose Walking Bear sat down on a log near the fire and gestured for Matthew and me to join her. This is hard to explain to outsiders, she said. But you're not really outsiders, are you? You both have Cherokee blood. You both grew up hearing the old stories. Matthew spoke first. Are you Nunahai? We are, Rose said simply. The immortal ones. The people who live between the worlds. She looked at me. Your grandmother knew about us. She helped protect this place when she was young. My grandmother? But she never said... She couldn't. That was part of her promise. But she taught you the old ways, didn't she? Taught you to listen to the forest, to respect the spirits in the mountains. She was right. Grandmother had taught me those things, but I'd thought they were just traditions. Ways to be a good Cherokee person, not this. What is this place? I asked. A refuge, Rose explained. When the soldiers came to drive our people from their homes, when they burned our villages and forced us west on the trail of death, some of us didn't go. The Nunahai helped us create this place, a valley that exists in many times at once. Here, the Cherokee way of life is safe. Here, it can never be destroyed. I looked around the village again. Everything looked so real, so normal. Children were playing games. Women were working on pottery. Men were repairing tools. It was like stepping back 200 years. But these hunters, I said, pointing to the 5 men. They're from 1955. They don't belong here. Don't we? Asked James Morrison. He stood up and walked over to us. Will, I've been here 3 days, and it's the best 3 days of my life. No deadlines, no traffic, no clients yelling at me. Just good food, good company, and work that matters. The other hunters nodded agreement. They all looked healthier somehow, like the stress had melted right off them. We tried to leave the first day, said another man, but every trail we took led us back here. Rose explained that the valley chooses who can come and go. And we don't want to leave anymore, James added. This is what life is supposed to be like. Rose looked at me seriously. The valley called them here, Will, just like it called you. These men were lost in their own lives, working jobs that gave them no joy, living in a world that had forgotten how to be peaceful. The valley showed them another way. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. Are you saying they can't leave? That they're trapped here? Not trapped, Rose said. Invited. There's a difference. Anyone can leave if they truly want to, but the valley only opens its doors when people are ready to find something better. Matthew had been quiet during this whole conversation, but now he spoke up. Rose, I need to ask you something. Are you from our time or from the old days? She smiled. Both. Neither. Time works differently here. I was born in 1794, the year before the Cherokee were forced to sign away their lands. I've lived in this valley for 161 years, but I've only aged 5 years in all that time. My husband was killed at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend, fighting alongside Andrew Jackson before Jackson turned against us. The Nunahai brought me here when I was dying of grief. The implications of what she was saying hit me like a punch to the stomach. You mean this place is real? All of it? You're really from the 1790s? Touch my hand, Rose said, holding it out. I reached over and took her hand in mine. It was warm, solid, real. Her calluses felt like those of someone who worked with her hands every day. This wasn't a dream or a hallucination. The Nunahai exist to preserve what's important, Rose continued. Cherokee culture, Cherokee people, Cherokee lands. When the outside world becomes too dangerous, we create places like this. Islands of safety in the stream of time. But why? I asked. Why show yourselves now? Why bring these hunters here? Rose's expression grew serious. Because the valley is in danger. The outside world is changing again. We've heard about plans to build a dam to flood these mountains, to cut down the old-growth forests for lumber. If that happens, we'll lose our connection to the normal world entirely. We'll be cut off forever. What does that have to do with me? You're a forest ranger, Will. You have influence with the government people. And more than that, you have Cherokee blood and a Cherokee heart. You understand why places like this need to be protected. I felt the weight of what she was asking settling on my shoulders. You want me to stop the development? We want you to help us stay hidden, Rose said. To make sure this valley doesn't appear on any official maps. To keep the modern world from finding us until we're ready to be found. Matthew leaned forward. What about the hunters? Their families will be worried. Some can return, Rose said, with their memories changed, so they remember being lost in a snowstorm, nothing more. But others, she looked at James Morrison. Others have found their true home here. They'll choose to stay. I can't let people just disappear, I said. It's not right. Even if they're happier than they've ever been? Rose asked. Even if this is where they truly belong? I looked at the 5 hunters again. They were all listening to our conversation, but none of them looked worried or scared. They looked like men who had found something they'd been searching for their whole lives. There's something else, Rose said quietly. Something your grandmother would have told you if she'd lived longer. You're not just Cherokee, Will. You're descended from the Nunahai themselves. That's why you can see this place. That's why the valley called you here. That's impossible. Is it? Haven't you always felt different? Haven't you always been able to find your way in the woods, even when you should have been lost? Haven't you always heard the mountains singing? She was right, and that scared me more than anything else. I had always been different. I had always been able to navigate these mountains like I'd been born here, and I had been hearing singing in the hills for as long as I could remember. What are you asking me to do? I said. Rose stood up and walked to the edge of the clearing. Come with me. Let me show you something. We followed her to a path that led up the side of the valley. As we climbed, I could see more of the hidden village spread out below us. It was huge, maybe 1,000 people living in perfect harmony with the forest. At the top of the path was a cave entrance, carved with Cherokee symbols. Rose lit a torch from a fire that never seemed to go out and led us inside. The cave walls were covered with paintings, Cherokee history, from the beginning of time right up to the present day. I could see pictures of the Trail of Tears, the Civil War, both world wars, but I could also see pictures of things that hadn't happened yet. Cities bigger than any I'd ever seen, machines flying through the air, people living in ways I couldn't imagine. The Nunahai see all of time, Rose explained. Past, present, and future. We know what's coming, Will. The world is going to change in ways that will make the Cherokee removals look small. In 50 years, there won't be any wild places left unless someone protects them. And you think I can help? I think you're the bridge between our world and theirs. You can live in both places, speak both languages. You can make sure this valley survives. At the back of the cave, the paintings showed something that made my blood run cold. Cherokee people, including children, living in cities with no connection to the land. Cherokee language disappearing. Cherokee ceremonies forgotten. Everything my grandmother had taught me, gone. This is what happens if we fail, Rose said. If places like this valley are destroyed, the Cherokee people lose their souls. They survive, but they become something else entirely. I stared at the paintings for a long time. Then I asked the question I was afraid to hear answered. What do you need me to do? Rose led us back down to the village as the sun was setting. But here in the valley, the sunset looked different. Longer, more golden, like time itself was moving slower. Tonight you'll stay with us, Rose said. Tomorrow you'll make your choice. What choice? Whether to help us protect this place, or to try to take all the hunters back to your world and pretend none of this ever happened. They gave Matthew and me a house to share for the night. It was built in the old Cherokee style with a central fire and sleeping furs arranged around the walls. The smoke went up through a hole in the roof, and I could see stars through the opening. More stars than I'd ever seen before. bright and close, like diamonds. Matthew was quiet for a long time after we settled in. Finally, he spoke. "Will, I think I know why the tribal council really sent me to find you." "What do you mean?" "They've been talking for months about strange things happening in the mountains. Hunters finding trails that shouldn't exist, hikers hearing voices in Cherokee, speaking dialects that died out 100 years ago. The elders have been waiting for something like this." I poked at the fire with a stick, watching the sparks rise toward the stars. "Do you believe her? About the Nunahai? About this place existing in different times?" "I'm sitting in a Cherokee village that shouldn't exist, talking to people who should have died 2 centuries ago," Matthew said. "At this point, I'll believe anything. But those hunters, I can't just let them disappear. Their families. What if their families are better off without them?" Matthew asked quietly. "What if they were miserable in their old lives, and this is the first peace they've ever found?" I thought about James Morrison. I'd known him since we were kids. He'd always seemed stressed, always worried about money and work and keeping up appearances. Here in the valley, he looked 10 years younger. "That's not for me to decide," I said. "Isn't it? You're a forest ranger, Will. Your job is to protect the wilderness. Well, this is wilderness, the most important wilderness left in the world, a place where Cherokee culture lives and breathes instead of just surviving in museums." That night, I dreamed about my grandmother. She was young in the dream, maybe 25, dressed in traditional Cherokee clothes. We were standing in the same valley, but it looked different, newer somehow, with fewer houses and more wild forest. "You found them," she said, smiling. "Grandmother, why didn't you tell me about this place?" "Because you weren't ready. Children need to grow up in the regular world first, learn its ways, understand its dangers. Only then can they choose which world they truly belong to. Rose says I'm descended from the Nunahai. Your great-great-grandmother was. She chose to leave the valley and live in the outside world, to have children and pass on the old knowledge. Every few generations, one of her descendants is called back. Called back for what? To decide if the valley stays hidden or reveals itself to the world. To be the bridge between what was and what will be. I woke up just before dawn. The fire had burned down to coals, and Matthew was already awake, sitting by the door and looking out at the village. "Did you decide?" he asked. "Did you?" He was quiet for a moment. "I think I want to stay, Will. Not forever, but for a while. I want to learn the old ways properly from people who actually lived them. The tribal council would understand." "And the hunters?" "Let them choose for themselves. Give them all the facts, then let them decide." After breakfast, Rose gathered all of us together, me, Matthew, and the 5 hunters. We sat in a circle by the main fire, and she explained everything. How the valley worked, what it meant to stay, what it meant to leave. "If you go back," she said, "your memories of this place will fade. You'll remember being lost in the woods, being found by search teams, nothing more. You'll return to your old lives." "And if we stay?" asked James Morrison. "You become part of Cherokee time. You age slowly, live long, learn our ways, but you can never return to the outside world as yourselves. If you ever leave, it must be as someone else entirely." 3 of the hunters chose to return. They were family men with children, with responsibilities they couldn't abandon. But 2, James Morrison and a man named Robert Stone, chose to stay. "I've been practicing law for 20 years, James said. "I've never been happy, not once. Here, I feel like I'm alive for the first time." Robert nodded. "My wife died 2 years ago. My kids are grown and don't need me. I've got nothing to go back to and everything to discover here." Rose looked at Matthew. "And you?" "I want to stay for 1 year, he said. "Learn what I can, then return to the reservation and teach others. The tribal council needs to know about this place." Finally, Rose turned to me. "Will?" I looked around the circle at all these faces, some old, some young, some from my time and some from centuries past. They were all waiting for my answer. "I can't stay," I said. My wife is having our baby, and I won't abandon them. But I can help protect this place. How? I'll make sure the valley never appears on any official maps. I'll report the missing hunters as found, but with memory loss from hypothermia. And I'll work with the Park Service to keep development away from this area. That's not enough, Rose said. The world is changing too fast. In 10 years, maybe 20, they'll have technology that can find us no matter how well hidden we are. Then what do you want me to do? We want you to be our ambassador. Visit us when you can, learn our ways, prepare for the day when we might need to reveal ourselves to save Cherokee culture from disappearing entirely. I thought about my wife, Sarah, about the baby we were expecting, about my life as a forest ranger. Then I thought about the paintings in the cave, showing a future where Cherokee people existed, but Cherokee culture had died. I'll do it, I said. I'll be your bridge to the outside world. Rose smiled and stood up. Then it's time for some of you to go home. The journey back to the normal world was like walking through a dream. Rose and 2 other Nunahai led us to the edge of the valley, where the air seemed to shimmer like heat waves rising from summer pavement. This is where we part ways, Rose said. She handed me a small leather pouch. Cherokee tobacco grown in our valley. When you need to find us again, burn some of this and follow the smoke. The path will appear. The 3 hunters who were returning, and Matthew, who would come back later, stepped through the shimmer. For a moment I could see them standing on both sides at once, like reflections in water. Then they were through, back in the regular forest. I looked back at the valley one more time. James Morrison and Robert Stone were standing with Rose, already dressed in Cherokee clothes, already looking like they belonged. They waved goodbye, but their faces were peaceful, like men who had finally found their place in the world. I stepped through the shimmer. On the other side, it was just regular forest again. October 1955, with yellow leaves and the smell of wood smoke. The 3 returning hunters looked confused, like they were waking up from a long sleep. "Where are we?" asked one of them. "What happened?" "You got lost in the snowstorm," I said, following the story Rose had given me. "You've been wandering for 3 days. I found you this morning." Matthew caught my eye and nodded. He understood. In the regular world, he'd been with the search party that found them. The valley had adjusted reality to make everything fit. The hike back to civilization took 6 hours. By the time we reached the road, the hunters truly didn't remember anything except being cold and lost. They thanked me for finding them and drove back to Knoxville, happy to be alive, but with no idea how close they'd come to a completely different life. I called Sheriff Morrison from town. "Found your missing hunters," I told him. "All safe. 3 of them are headed home now." 3? There were 5. The other 2 decided to stay in the mountains for a few more days. Hunting's good this year. It wasn't exactly a lie. That night I called Sarah from my cabin. "Hey, honey, how are you feeling?" "Good. Tired, but good. The baby's been kicking all day." She paused. "How was your search and rescue?" "Successful. Found everyone safe and sound." "I'm glad. You sound different, though. Like something changed." She was right. Everything had changed. I was still Will Riversong, forest ranger. But now I was also something else. A keeper of secrets, a guardian of hidden places, a bridge between the world that was and the world that could be. Over the next few months, I kept my promise. I made sure the valley's location stayed off all official maps. When surveyors came to scout for a new logging road, I guided them around that area entirely. When government officials talked about expanding tourism in the national forest, I steered the conversation toward other locations. And sometimes, late at night when I was alone in my fire tower, I could hear singing in the hills. Cherokee voices carrying on traditions that would have been lost forever if not for the hidden valley. My grandmother's voice was among them, I was sure of it. Sarah had our baby in December, a daughter we named Mary, after my grandmother. When she was old enough to understand, I would tell her the old stories. Not all of two. Not yet. But enough to keep the door open, in case the valley ever called to her the way it had called to me. Because I knew now that some places exist outside of normal time, preserving what must never be lost. And sometimes, if you're lucky enough and Cherokee enough and brave enough to listen, you can hear them singing in the hills. The tobacco pouch Rose gave me sits in my desk drawer, waiting for the day I'll need to find the valley again. I hope that day never comes. It would mean Cherokee culture is in danger of disappearing forever. But if it does come, I'll be ready. The hills are still singing after all, and I'm finally old enough to understand their song,